This took place a while ago, 2015-ish, but I'll probably never forget it for the rest of my life. I, around 21 at the time and female, was still fairly new to my city. I had just gotten out of a bad relationship, wasn't in the best place mentally, and didn't know a lot of people in town besides my ex and his friends. I was on a dating or hookup app, looking for people to hang out with casually, maybe find an FWB or something. I had matched with a 25-year-old guy, Simon. We talked sporadically in the app for a few days. He explained that he was in a band and living in a house with his bandmates. He sent me their music. It was just an audio on YouTube with a heavily edited still image of 4 or 5 guys playing rock instruments. One of them looked like him. The music was an interesting combination of styles and not really for me, but whatever. He seemed to be like a nice enough guy. He stopped replying for a few days and I figured that was that and moved on. And one day, I was at work and got a message from him saying sorry that he'd been so busy and inviting me to a barbecue with his friends and bandmates in their yard. He explained that their band manager was providing them the house to live in. Based on the lack of views on the YouTube video and the fact that I only ever saw one photo of him playing in the band, I figured that he was probably exaggerating the band manager thing. I thought it was more likely something along the lines of a bar manager friend giving them a discount on rent in exchange for being a house band at their bar or something, and didn't think too much of it beyond that. Normally, I would have just said no to going to a barbecue alone at the home of someone that I didn't really know, but I was really bored and figured that I might be able to overcome some social anxiety and maybe even make some female friends with, since he made it sound like a pretty big party. I put the neighborhood that he gave me into maps, and it was a suburban area with lots of families as far as I knew. I figured that being in a yard on such a nice summer day wouldn't be overly risky because lots of neighbors would be outside. Plus, it was just a few train stops away from my workplace, and I was off in a few hours anyway. I did tell him that I wasn't overly comfortable with the idea, since I didn't really know him well, but that I would stop over for a bit if I didn't need to go inside the house at all. He said that that was totally fine, which made me feel a lot better about the whole thing. I even made sure not to drink anything for the rest of my shift so that I wouldn't be risking needing to go inside to use the bathroom. I was anxious about showing up to a barbecue with people that I didn't know at all, as he implied that the event was already underway. Plus, I would have had a hard time finding a specific address from the backyard side, so I asked Simon if he could meet me at the train station, since he said that it was a quick walk away anyway. He agreed to do that, and I let him know when I was leaving for work and what time the map said the train would get to the station and all of that. I sent Simon a message to tell him that I had arrived at the train station at around 5:30, and after I looked around, I couldn't find him. He told me that he was running behind and to just start walking toward the neighborhood. I was about halfway across the massive train station parking lot when I saw him slowly wandering toward me. I recognized his clothes, wearing bell-bottoms when they were not common, especially for men, and long hair from far away. But up close his face looked pretty different from his photos. It might have been some heavy-duty editing, I don't even know, but he kind of looked a little bit different. Older looking than the 25-year-old guy in the photos by maybe 5 to 10 years. Maybe he used photos of his brother or something. I don't even know. It was before AI, and so I'm really not sure how that was possible, but this was the first real red flag for sure. But stupidly, I brushed it off. Maybe he's just self-conscious. Maybe he smokes a lot and doesn't wear sunscreen and hasn't taken pictures in a while. All of his pictures looked candid, so I figured that he wasn't much of a selfie guy anyway. And besides, I'm mostly here to make friends anyway, so I shouldn't judge his appearance so harshly. He was also clearly already drunk, but a lot of my ex's friends were heavy drinkers, so that didn't seem too strange to me. I mean, he's hosting a barbecue after all. Now, the second red flag came shortly after when we arrived at the front door. I reminded him that I wasn't comfortable going inside the house, but he assured me that we would just have to walk through to get to the backyard. Okay, fine, whatever. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where you could just walk around the house to get to the backyard anyway, so it made sense. And we would have had to have backtracked to the main road to go down the alley directly to the backyard. So I figured that he just forgot what I had said about not wanting to go inside and didn't want to cause a bunch of trouble, so I went with it. We got into the house and he immediately closed the door and locked the deadbolt and the knob behind me. I didn't think that was too weird, since nobody was hanging out inside and a lot of people are just in the habit of locking the door when they come in anyway. But it still did give me a bit of the heebie-jeebies for some reason. Then Simon told me that he'd really like to give me a tour of the house. I politely declined and reminded him that I was just there for the barbecue. He said that he and his bandmates had worked really hard to get the house and he was really proud of it. At that point, I was getting really skeptical because usually when guys would tell me things that seemed a bit far-fetched, they'd let the truth slip by the time that they got me to their house. But still, I convinced myself that I was being unreasonable. I was already in the stupid house anyway. He insisted that it would be quick. Not the wisest choice, I know, but I was pretty good at explaining away red flags, so at this point, Simon still mostly had a dopey stoner art kind of vibe as far as I was concerned. He really didn't seem like a threat, just an insecure oddball who, well, sucks at communicating with fibs a bit. Not unlike my ex, who was definitely emotionally and verbally abusive, but it never escalated past that. I figured that, at worst, he'd get handsy and I'd get called a prude for not sleeping with him. I didn't have a lot of self-worth at the time, obviously, so in the end, I just went with it. The tour started pretty uneventfully, other than that the decor in the common areas was obviously chosen by a middle-aged Martha Stewart enthusiast, and not a bunch of guys in a band or their fake band manager. I didn't know if this should make me feel better or worse, to be honest. I mean, on one hand he was clearly lying, but on the other it did make me think that it was probably just somebody's mum's house and she was out of town and he didn't want to tell me that he lived at a friend's parents' home and didn't actually have a paying job or whatever. Again, a total red flag, I know, but I could rationalize it at the time. The bedroom doors were all closed. The bathroom was unremarkable. He then showed me the kitchen, and I finally saw through the window that there was nobody in the backyard. There weren't even barbecue supplies around. No burgers thawing on the counter, no cocktail supplies lying around, nothing. I asked him where everyone was and why he lied about the barbecue, and he told me that his bandmates were on tour still. They were just running behind due to van trouble, but they should be back any minute, so we could start the party. I asked him why he wasn't on tour with them if he's in the band. I don't even remember what his answer was, to be honest, to that, because it just didn't make any sense. At this point, though, I'm out of mental gymnastics to convince myself that this guy isn't just completely full of it. And obviously, I'm really freaked out. Took me long enough, right? I'm smarter now, don't worry, but I started trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation. I hoped that once he was done with the tour that we could go outside, and even just for a minute, and then I would just leave. I'd been in some sketchy situations in the past for sure, but luckily nothing so bad that they tried very hard to physically stop me when I walked away in a semi-public place. I just wasn't really comfortable trying this inside the house. I knew that this guy was full of it now, but I had no idea just how much worse it could get. I instinctively pretended to believe all of his bull. He offered me a beer and I said no thanks because I had to work in the morning. He said okay and cracked one for himself. Then he wanted to take the tour downstairs. I could see from the top of the stairs that the basement was the dark and creepy kind, and really small windows, so I refused. I asked if we could go back outside, and he said after the tour. I tried to argue about going into the basement, told him that I have a spider phobia, that I don't like basements, etc. All lies, obviously. He started to get agitated about my reluctance, so I figured that it would be better to just let him show me the dang basement, and then hopefully we could go outside because I really didn't know what else to do. The basement, it was fairly unremarkable, to be honest. A couch, TV, elliptical, until I noticed something that really gave me chills. You see, the house was probably built in, I don't know, maybe the 1990s or late 80s at the absolute earliest. But I saw a door that looked just like the heavy foam-lined door to the cold storage room in my grandma's house. The kind that only opened from the outside. It was just a smaller version of the big metal doors on commercial walk-in fridges, and it looked really out of place in this house. I would absolutely not go anywhere near that door too. He opened it and told me that it was their soundproof music studio. I looked inside from a few meters away. It did indeed look soundproof, and it was about the size of a bedroom, and I could see a few guitars and amps in it, mattress toppers on the walls. No drum kit or recording equipment that I could see, though. He insisted that I go inside to get a better look. He was standing outside the door, motioning for me to go in. And man, did the alarm bells start ringing at this point. I realized that I could totally die here if I'm not careful, and so I turned around and ran up the stairs. He closed the door and followed me, asking what's wrong, acting like I'm being all unreasonable for not wanting to see his soundproof music studio. So I'm realizing that this is way sketchier of a situation than any of my ex's stuff, and I am freaking out. At that point, my main objective was getting out of this house. The front and the back doors were both closed and locked, so if I tried to run, he'd be able to get to me before I could go to get the locks open. The bathroom did not have a window. The house had a sort of convoluted floor plan that I wasn't really familiar with, and he was also much bigger than I was. He was the tall, lanky type who can run fast even if they're out of shape and smoke a pack a day. I pretended that I was okay with hanging out with him in the hopes that he'd chill out a bit. We made small talk for a few minutes. He cracked another beer, and thankfully he did calm down. I desperately mentioned yet again that it was beautiful outside and suggested that we go sit in the yard while we wait, but he said no and started to get agitated that I wanted to leave already. I told him that I could stay, but I'd just really like to smoke a cigarette. He told me that we could smoke cigarettes inside and pointed to a cereal bowl full of cigarette butts. We sat down at the table and lit some cigarettes. As he was smoking, he started rolling a joint, which he promptly lit as soon as his cig was done. He offered me some, and I said no thanks. He insisted, so I took the smallest puff that I could. I'm a pretty seasoned smoker, but I pretended to cough excessively and told him that I'm a novice, so that was more than enough for me. And for a liar himself, he thankfully wasn't very good at picking up on the lies of others. After we smoked, he asked if I'd like to watch a movie until his bandmates get back. I told him that I was really looking forward to spending the day outside, and suggested we go for a walk or visit the park, ideas that he did not like or appreciate. At this point, I was trying to keep as much distance as possible between us, but he stayed close enough to me that I could smell the beer on his breath. He grabbed me by my waist, and I backed away and asked about the barbecue food to try and change the subject and make him think that I still believed what he was telling me. He started to get angry again and sternly reiterated that his bandmates should be home any minute, and my anxiety was absolutely through the roof at this stage. I tried to calm him down again with generic small talk, and now I don't know how I got so lucky, but the next thing that happened might have saved me. Simon went to the fridge to get another beer and pulled out an empty box. At this point, he's getting even more angry than before, so I went out on a limb and suggested that we get some more beer for the party, because I was out of ideas. I was terrified that it would enrage him even more to suggest once again that we leave the house, but I had to try. Thankfully, though, his eyes lit up with the possibility that I could actually be down to drink with him, and so he agreed. As we were walking to the liquor store, I still didn't really have a plan because I was no longer comfortable just walking away from this menace in this weirdly desolate suburb, but I was extremely relieved to be out of that house. I walked with him to the liquor store, and when we got there, told him that I didn't need to go inside if he was just going to grab some beer. He insisted, though, that I had to go inside. At that point, I was so stressed and frazzled that I just went with him and hoped that a good opportunity to leave would arise. When we got inside the liquor store, he asked what kind of beer I wanted. I reminded him that I had to work tomorrow and didn't want to drink too much. He demanded to know what kind of beer I wanted, so I just named the first one that came to mind. He went to pay. The cashier was kind of a jerk, so I didn't ask for help. I probably should have in hindsight, but I panicked and didn't. I hoped that there might be somebody in the parking lot, though, who might help me if I made a bit of a scene. Unfortunately, there was nobody. I really regretted not asking the liquor store guy for help at this stage, but also remembered the times my ex told people that I was crazy so that they wouldn't take me seriously. The liquor store guy definitely seemed like he would have fell for that for sure, so who knows. Probably for the best that I didn't expect him to help me. In any case, I had one last idea before I took my chances, just trying to run and or scream. You see, there was a drugstore across from the liquor store, and I told Simon that I had to go and buy a toothbrush or something that vaguely implied that I might stay over. He eagerly agreed to this, but tried to follow me into the store. I told him that you're not allowed to bring beer into a drugstore. I don't even know if that's true. I really doubt it's any kind of law, but luckily, and thank the heavens, this drunk douchebag believed it and agreed to wait outside. Now, being so naive, I thought that maybe I could just wander around in this drugstore for long enough and he would either get the hint or get sketched out or bored and leave. But no, I must have wandered around the store for at least half an hour, and this guy is still just standing there staring in the window. This creep didn't even have his phone out, and every time that I checked if he was still there, he was just staring through the window looking for me. I didn't feel like I had anybody that I could call in the city to come and help me. The cops here don't usually take things like this very seriously, and the store workers looked like they were mostly high school students, and I didn't want to drag them into this anyway, so I really didn't feel like I had a lot of options. After being in there for so long, though, I was surprised he didn't come in to see what was taking me so long. I thought that maybe I could lose him in the aisles and sneak out of the store if he did come in, but no. I ended up hovering around the tills and waited until a big group of friendly-looking people were paying. I followed them out of the store and immediately told Simon to leave me alone and go home. I said it firmly and loudly enough to imply that I would make a scene if need be. Simon looked at the people getting in their car, who were now pausing and looking at us because I had nearly yelled at him. And then he just turned around and left. It was bizarrely anticlimactic, which honestly I was very thankful for. I literally ran to the station, which thankfully was in a different direction than his house and from the store, and I never heard from him ever again. When I got home, his app profile had either been blocked or had been deleted. Years later, after I stopped compartmentalizing the whole thing, honestly, I wish that I would have reported him or something. It bothers me to wonder if he tried it again with somebody else, but made sure the fridge was stocked first. But at the time, I just didn't think anybody would take me seriously. I was embarrassed of my choices too, and I just wanted to move on from the whole thing. Plus, all I really had was a likely fake first name and a general idea of where this house was, which probably wasn't even enough. I guess that I'll never really know any more than I do now, and maybe that's for the best, but in any case, I'm grateful that I made it out that day, even if I made a lot of poor choices. So I was driving home late one night, around 12:30 in the morning. It was nothing unusual for me. This was actually my weekly routine, in fact. I was used to these late-night drives, so I wasn't scared or really even thinking about anything serious. It was winter and the roads were pretty empty though, so I was driving at around 90 to 120 kilometers an hour. Then I came to a bridge. The air near the water was more foggy due to the underwater, so I slowed down a bit, dropping my speed to about 38 kilometers. And that was when I saw her. A woman dressed completely in white, just standing on the side of the bridge, alone. Now, I'm not one of those people who does stupid things in situations like this, so stopping wasn't even on my mind. But for some reason, my car just suddenly gave out on its own. I froze for a second, completely startled by this. And that's when I noticed that she was actually holding a child in her arms. I still really don't know what came over me, but I rolled down the window and asked, "Do you want to go somewhere? Are you okay?" She didn't answer. She just stood there and slowly raised her hand and pointed down toward the river below. That was when I made the mistake of looking at the child. All I can say is that his face was bright red. And I mean, it's hard to explain it in words, but it was not normal is what I'm getting at. And after all of this, I even wonder if it was even human. The fear after looking at that child, though, kind of snapped my senses in me right then, and like I was back in control of my body. My mum's old advice flashed through my head, and I did exactly that. I spat in that direction, then I slammed my foot on the accelerator and drove as fast as I possibly could. I didn't look back, not even once. To this day, I really still cannot explain what happened that night. Why did my car stop like that? Why did I even talk to her? Who was that woman and the child in her arms? Or what were they is probably the better question. And also, what exactly was she pointing at? Let's be honest, don't we all deserve a little bit of romance, even if it's just in our headphones? Well, Dipsea is an audio app made for romance lovers, with short, spicy stories that immerse you in the fantasies you've been craving. Dipsea is the female-founded app for spicy audiobooks and more. Created by women for the female gaze, their app has over 1,000 spicy audiobooks, all crafted by a team of professional writers and top-tier narrators. And if you're anything like me and a bit of an insomniac, then you will love their section for sleep. I personally really enjoyed their section with ambient sounds like winter rain, and actually ended up falling asleep to one that night, which was really nice. And with their easy-to-explore app, you can search for your favorite romance genres like contemporary, historical, dark, sports, western, romantasy, sapphic, and more. New chapters are released every week, so you'll always find something new to enjoy. And right now, listeners of this show can get an extended 30-day free trial. Just go to dipseastories.com/scared to start your free trial. That's DIPSEA stories.com/scared for 30 days of full access for free. Visit dipseastories.com/scared. So I lived in Union, Maine for the first 14 years of my life. a beautiful blue farmhouse with a huge basement, backyard, and blueberry field. I'd been hearing some strange sounds coming from my basement, and my mum never wanted me to go down there either. I let my mind get the best of me, I guess, and I decided to go down there one day. My mum wasn't home, and I was just there with my dog, so little me took my dog down with me, so I wasn't so scared. I walked down the 13 stairs to the basement, and my feet hit the floor, my dog right on my tail. When you walk down these stairs, you can go left or right. If you turn left, there's a little room that was used as a bedroom for my older brother. If you turned right, that was the garage area where we would bring cars in to work on them, along with like a wood stove and a boiler room. Stacked along the wall was nothing but wood that we used for heat. I remember walking around the area barefoot, and I actually stepped on a nail. I screamed in pain and wobbled my way up the stairs, and I tried to pull that out when my mum came home and found me in a pool of blood, basically. We bandaged up my foot, and I was sent outside to play while my mum spent the afternoon sweeping up the basement. Now, a few days later, I wanted to go down again, so I did. Once again, I brought my dog with me, but this time I made sure to wear some shoes, and I made it over to the boiler room when I heard a sort of, like a small moan, I guess. That's when my dog started to freak out too. He was growling, the hair was standing on the back of his neck. He was as nervous as I was, it seemed. So I panicked, and once again, I ran back upstairs. I spent days wanting to figure out what was down there, but I gave up for a while, and one night I was lying in bed, and you know when you're almost sort of asleep, but you get jumped awake, I guess is the best way to put it. Well, I jumped, and when I did, I kicked my dog in the process and fell onto the ground, unable to move. The only thing that I could move were my eyes, and they darted across the room at the corner that I was always scared of. And there, stood in that corner, was a tall black shadow. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I started to sweat, and as it walked over to me, it stopped right at my bedside. I looked at the clock, and it said 2:07 a.m. This is when my body sort of awoke, I guess you could say. I looked at my clock again, and it said 7:02 a.m. I was asleep the whole time. I told my mum about it, of course, but no one believed me. I really wanted to know, though, at this stage, what this thing was. So, a few weeks later, I had just come home from school, and my mum wasn't home yet, so I didn't do my homework because, well, kids don't do that, right? I wanted to play instead, and my neighbor was home, so I decided to have him come outside to play with me in the basement. And this is when things took a dark turn. You see, he brought a Ouija board, and we played around at the table downstairs, when all of a sudden a pen spun around and hit me in the gut. He laughed and thought that I did it on purpose when we both let go of the board. And that's when the lights started to flicker, and the board literally flipped up on its side. He threw it into the wood stove, but it wouldn't catch fire for some reason, and that's when we knew that we needed to get out of there. So we started to run up the stairs when I was pushed down them. He didn't stop until he was at the top of the stairs when he finally noticed. Eventually, I made it up the stairs, and we ran outside and waited until my mum got home. Things finally started to calm down after this, though, and they sort of went back to normal, I guess you could say. My dreams kept repeating themselves, and I eventually seeked out some therapy. There's plenty more to this story that I hope to share at some point, so stay tuned and, well, thanks for listening. This takes place in Cacao Beach in Florida on May of 2021. So after an hour or two of gazing towards the sunset, watching the waves come and go and pondering about my life, it's now dark. I became fixed on the stars, and that's when I began noticing a light and You see off in the distance a plane moving sort of thing. But it seemed to be moving too fast for how high an altitude it seemed to be. It also had the common characteristic of a UFO where it buzzed around like a bee rather than smoothly gliding through the air. At first, I assumed it must be a high-tech drone, as I knew that there was a launch station pretty close by, but very quickly that assumption was fading as it just seemed to buzz around in no clear direction, always directly above me. I cannot fully describe the feeling, but somehow I knew it knew that I was watching it. Once I gave it my full attention, it flew towards the ocean where I had to sit up and stare above the water to continue watching it. I remember the moon being at least half full, and it was bright enough that I could clearly see the clouds and see anyone on the beach that passed by, even though I was alone at this time. I watched what I can only describe as a distant star-like light, only slightly bigger than the brightest star in the sky, again buzz around quickly in a seemingly directionless way. But now it seemed to be showing off more and flying erratically. It would go in one direction super fast and then make a dead stop. I also noticed the clouds reacting to its flight and shifting and twisting along with its movement in a sort of DNA sort of shape, and it was around this time where things got weird. This is the point of the story where I can only say that my reality started to crack. So the light was on the left side of the sky, and out of nowhere, it shoots across, horizontally to the right, at about 10 times the speed that it was moving before. As it reaches this small patch of clouds, I watch it teleport 100 yards directly to its left, then the same distance to its right, about 8 to 10 times, as it's moving in the same direction. It does this in succession in a way that it looked like it was jumping almost from point to point, and not flying. Again, it makes a dead stop directly after this. At this point, my jaw has dropped for the first time in my life. I was thinking, did I really just see that? And, for good measure, it does the same thing again, it seems. Almost as if it actually heard me. It flies back to the left side of the sky, shoots across and teleports again. Now I'm on my feet though, as my reality is breaking before my eyes and I'm trying to make sense of what I'm actually seeing and what's happening. A man leaving the beach starts coming near me though, and I think perfect, maybe someone else is seeing what I'm seeing. I get his attention, which he seems extremely annoyed by, and I say, "Are you seeing that thing flying around up there?" His response was, "Yeah, it's pretty cool, huh?" and walks off the beach, not even looking up from the ground as he says this. Okay, great. So I am crazy and now I look crazy to this random dad is what I think to myself. I'm not certain what happened to the light after this, as I was pretty dumbfounded and my mind was just in a WTF mode. I think it must have just taken off up into space shortly after the interaction with the man, but now begins the humanoid encounter. So I don't see anyone else nearby that could have seen the light, so I start walking towards the water at this stage. On this beach, there's a ridge about 20 feet from the shoreline, and there's a gradual descent to the water at about 5 feet. I'm standing at the top of the ridge when I notice two figures coming from the left. They are directly in front of the shoreline, and at first I thought it was just two people jogging next to each other. But as I'm focusing my eyes on them, I cannot seem to make out any body parts moving or, well, definitive features. I don't see arms or legs moving. I don't see hair bouncing. I don't see sand being kicked up. Nothing. I can make out the outline of a torso and maybe legs, but I'm seeing right through them into the ocean, as if they have that sort of predator camouflage sort of thing. They were the same size, but both shorter than the average human, moving in synchronicity with each other and seemed more like they were floating rather than walking or running, though they were moving at a jogging pace. I still thought that maybe it was just my eyes messing with me in the dark, but it really wasn't that dark. I start to walk over closer as they pass in front of me, slowly in case they were just joggers, as I didn't want to freak people out just approaching them in the dark like that. But when I take a few steps forward, they both pick up speed and go past me and out of sight within a few seconds. But again, no perceivable movements or sounds or anything. They just zoom away down the shoreline. Looking back on this whole thing, it is interesting to me that I saw these entities immediately after seeing the light. I still even consider the possibility that it was military tech, and the figures walking by were just cloaked people seeing who saw the test flight. But the fact that I felt a mental connection between us makes me think that it was a spiritual or alien encounter, I guess you could say. I swear to you that it felt like it communicated a, hey, watch this, before blowing my mind with all the teleportation stuff. I also felt a presence or, I don't know, just pure fear after seeing those figures. Enough so, in fact, to immediately leave in my car. I've had a lot of bizarre experiences, but the majority of them have been subjective in the way that I cannot say for absolute certain that they weren't something like a hallucination or whatever, since I was the only witness. This, though, was heard by my mother as well, and if you knew this woman, you'd understand that there's not a chance that she was just playing along or anything like that. So, we lived in a bungalow on a farm a few miles out from the nearest town. The nearest buildings to us were the farmhouse, located further up a single-lane track, and the landowner's house, which was opposite us but all the way across a field. The farmer was a single guy in his late 40s, and the landowners were an older couple who lived alone. So there's really no possibility that this was some random kid that I knew who had decided to come all the way out in the middle of the night, somehow crawl into my home just to yell my name, and then crawl out without any noise and run off, which my scientist stepdad decided is the explanation, which drives me a little bit crazy because it's just really stupid and, well, he's pig-headed. Anyway, I was around 14 at the time, living with my mother and younger sister, who would have been 12. Her bedroom was on the other side of the kitchen, and there was a hallway between that and my bedroom. The kitchen door was shut, so it couldn't have been her. It didn't sound anything like her anyway, but the mother's room was diagonal across from mine over the hallway. I think her door was ajar, but my door was shut. It was about 10 to 15 minutes after we've all gotten into bed, and directly outside of my door, this voice yelled out, and it was in such a weird voice, like it sounded desperate and aggressive at the same time. Almost familiar, but also like no voice that I'd ever heard, and I completely froze because I was terrified. It was maybe 30 minutes later. I don't think that I waited a minute, but I called to my mother saying, "Mum, did you call me?" And she called back, "No, but I heard it too." And at that, I lost it. I just started bawling, and I mean, I've never been that scared. It might be worth noting too that when she responded, there was an obvious difference in the volume, like I could tell that I wasn't confusing her voice with, well, whatever it was that had been, because she sounded a lot quieter and muffled with her being situated across the way where she was. I know that this contains a lot of random info in this story about the house and such, but these are all the details that I've gone over and over again, looking for any mundane explanation. And I can say with absolute confidence that this was a disembodied voice. And although it scared me half to death at first, I kind of find it comforting now because I'm always very skeptical, even of stuff that I've experienced. But this is one thing that I know for certain happened. It wasn't just in my head, and it definitely has no explanation. I often think now that if a voice can come yelling out of thin air like that, which should be impossible, well then maybe anything is possible. And that thought, it gives me a lot of hope. Honestly, I really don't know where to start with this. I usually don't do this kind of stuff, but this is very interesting to me. So when I was 13, I had a whole friend group. We were on a camping site and there was a woods nearby, and we always went there with like 12 other people or so. We made a hut there. There was also a small lake that we could fish at, and overall it was a pretty fun place. The year before, we had already made some progression making the hut, and nothing really went wrong, and we went there at night with some flashlights and everything was cool. I should also mention too here that there was always a guy in the night who wanted to prank us using this music box and going away and playing scary sounds and stuff. Now, the year before this happened, near the woods, we found a part of a camping ground that seemed to be abandoned. I don't know for sure, but that's what it looked like. And everyone found it pretty creepy. I personally didn't find it creepy, I found it fascinating if anything. The woods that we were in were near an absent campsite, and it was always fun to find things. But me and my friends, we were with 5 other people, we were going to our hut like normal. It was about 8 PM in the winter, so it got dark pretty quickly. We were just doing the standard stuff, collecting sticks, making a what we called roof, looking for sticks that looked like guns and all that. And eventually, after, I would say about an hour, we heard a really scary noise. Everyone was laughing because we at first thought it was our friend doing it again, so we FaceTimed him and told him to stop joking around, but he was allegedly at his tent. The chills everyone had was unreal. So I told everyone to be quiet. It was silent for longer than 30 seconds. We moved on, and 5 minutes later, we heard the most gut-wrenching screech that we'd all ever heard. It was not human-like, too. Everyone was scared, and we moved to the abandoned part of the campsite. The campsite was actually pretty huge, but we stayed there for 20 minutes, just talking and thinking that it was nothing, until we heard the bushes start to crack like somebody was around and something big was in there. We live in an area where really there are no bears or anything that should be making a noise like that. Right now, when I think about it, it could have been a deer, I suppose, but we were scared and we stayed where we were and we didn't do anything. But after about 30 minutes of this, we all decided to run together, and when we got back, we promised that we would never return to the woods at night ever again like that. We came back to our tents at about 10:30 in the morning, and everything was torn into absolute shreds. This all happened over a pretty short time span of like 2 to 3 hours, obviously longer with us coming back in the morning, but the 2 to 3 hours refers to the time that we heard everything and saw everything. And to this day, it's really hard to come up with an explanation that explains, well, all of it. Tonight, my girlfriend and I had a brief but deeply unsettling experience in the lobby of a historic hotel in downtown Oklahoma City. It was bitterly cold and windy outside, and we had just returned from an OKC Thunder game, heading to the hotel where my mother was staying. The time was around 8:30 PM when we stepped into the lobby. To set the scene, this hotel occupies the old First National Bank building and has been painstakingly restored to reflect its original opulence. The floors are polished marble, the decor lavish, evoking a sense of grandeur from a bygone era. In the middle of the lobby stands a staircase leading to an upper level bustling with activity, a check-in desk, a restaurant, warm lighting, and the hum of conversation. But in the lobby by the valet, the atmosphere was, well, starkly different. It was cold, still, eerily quiet. and that was when I noticed him. Leaning against a pillar by the staircase was a man. He appeared to be looking down at his phone, holding it in both hands as though texting. My glance was brief at first until the phone slipped from his grip and hit the marble floor with a sharp crack. But he didn't move. His hands remained suspended in the same position, as though he was still holding the phone. Confused, I thought that maybe he had fallen asleep standing up or something. My eyes darted to the ground where the phone lay, then back up towards his face, and that's when I saw it. He was staring directly at me, and the look on his face was, oh, pure disgust. Not the kind of anger that you see when somebody's been wronged, but something far darker, hollow and malevolent. His eyes burned with a rage so intense that it literally sent a shiver down my spine. It was the kind of look that makes your stomach churn, the kind that makes you instinctively want to look away, and so I did. Trying to shake off the unease, we waited for the elevator. When it finally arrived, curiosity got the better of me, and I stole a glance back toward the pillar. And he was still there, still staring. His gaze bore into me like a physical weight, and I hurriedly stepped into the elevator, the doors closing on that unnerving scene. When we reached my mother's room, I asked if she had noticed the man, and she hadn't. And when I explained what had happened, she brushed it off and said that he was probably on drugs. My girlfriend, though, had seen him too. She didn't see the phone drop, but she caught that look, the same expression of pure disgust directed at us. After a few minutes, we left to head back to our car. As the elevator door slides open, my heart raced. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see him. He was still there, still staring. My girlfriend confirmed it later that she had locked eyes with him too, that same expression of disdain. As we walked out of the lobby and down the sidewalk, I couldn't resist one last glance back through the glass doors. And now he had turned. He was fully facing us now, his eyes locked onto mine as if following us out into the night. His face, it was chilling, psychopathic even. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was wrong. Something about it felt deeply, instinctually threatening. The moment that we turned the corner, we instantly broke into a sprint, running to our car and locking the doors as soon as we got inside. Thankfully, he didn't follow us, but even now, hours later, the memory of that face, it lingers, and I'll never forget it. So what do you guys think was going on? Drugs, mental illness, or was it something else more sinister? So there's this thing haunting me in my family's house, and it's been going on for probably like 2 or 3 years now. It all started with me a few years ago when I went to go to bed, and whenever I was lying down, these hands would start popping out of the doorway to the bedroom, like they were trying to climb through and into the room almost. It would always happen in the corner of my eye, and I would tell my family about it. And while they did believe me, nevertheless, they really hadn't witnessed anything for themselves, and so they weren't too sure what I was talking about. Well, it was not until a while later where my brother would start seeing the same thing by the doorway, except this time, it was a head. I also started seeing it too, and we would affectionately name it the Head, and I would eventually come across the urban legend that parents would tell their children to make them go to sleep at night, called El Coco. Now, as crazy as this sounds, El Coco is a monster with a giant bat ear that travels around late at night listening for kids who are still awake, and he apparently goes and eats them. I looked up the meaning and it loosely translates to the head. So I just found that a little bit creepy that we were calling this thing the head and there was already an urban legend with that same name. But the weird thing though is that it was soon that my mum also had seen it. She works at a care home next to our house, and one day she was in the dining room doing something and there was this cutout next to the doorway. And when she was about to leave the room, she saw a head in this cutout that she thought was one of the people that lived there. It was only for a second before it quickly moved out of sight, which is what it always does, and she walked to see if there was someone there, but obviously there wasn't. I believe my dad has also seen it, but I can't remember the story that he told me, so I won't go into detail about that. But a month or two ago, it either stopped showing up or we stopped paying attention to it because, well, we didn't see it again. But then, a few days ago, my other brother, not the first one I mentioned earlier, was hanging out with the first one in that same bedroom while I was out in the living room, and brother 2 saw something in the doorway in the corner of his eye, and he asked the other brother if it was me. Now, the head usually pops up high above the doorway, but this time it was down low, so I don't know if it was the same thing, but I guess that it's back again. I just want to know what this thing is, I guess, and I know that it sounds unbelievable, but whether you believe it or not, I'm wondering if you've ever heard of any myths or legends of something like this, or if maybe you've experienced something like this yourself. It doesn't seem like a ghost because of the way it tries to hide from us, like it could get caught. From what I understand of ghosts, they can just disappear, right? In any case, if you can provide me with any details, then I would be very thankful. When I was about 17, my mother and I moved into this giant house owned by her boss. It was at least 5 bedrooms, 6 if you repurposed a study. There were 100 red flags, but we were desperate and the rent was cheap. The day that we moved in, my mother's antique grandfather clock fell over in the U-Haul. It had this ornamental spike on the top and it was bent from the fall. It was brass or some kind of coppery metal, and a strong white crease formed where it had bent. I had tried to right it, but I couldn't without snapping it off. We got it into the house and continued moving things in, and the next day the spike was straight up with absolutely no crease or line where it had bent. That was obviously weird. That first night there was constant bangs and thumps though. It sounded like running down the halls with doors slamming. Our little dog, a terrier, kept barking and freaking out. I figured that it was an old house settling, maybe a loose shutter on the window banging. Turns out though that the shutters were all ornamental and firmly fixed to the outside. The house though never made those noises again, though the walking down the halls continued frequently. Well, after a couple of months I started having some bad dreams. Usually I dream in third person, hopping narrative views between characters. I almost never dream about myself, but the nightmares that I had were first person now, of me in my bed. A man would be in the room near the door. There were no outlets in the room for a lamp, and the only actual light was a pull cord next to the door. This is before I had a cell phone, by the way. I somehow never thought that you get a flashlight with them, but anyway, since I couldn't turn the light on, I couldn't see him well, and he just stood there, by the door, by the light cord. Eventually, though, I would just sort of drift off into the dream, and, well, then it would end. I had this nightmare often, but not every night, nor even every week, but it definitely happened enough that it was a nuisance. I didn't say anything because, what kind of conversation is that anyway, but one night, it all changed. He wasn't by the door. He was now standing right next to my bed, seemingly looking down at me. From that distance, the moonlight illuminated him enough to see him. He was an older man in a black and grey striped pinsuit. He had a little bowler hat on, and his smile reached right across his face, sharp and glistening teeth showing. He said, "Don't worry, it won't hurt. I'll eat you in your sleep." And the next thing that I knew, it was morning. I made some excuses and told my mum that I wanted to change rooms, to be closer to the bathroom. I thought that if it wasn't a dream, the man was tied to the bedroom itself, as it had been the master bedroom back in the day. Of course, I said nothing about the dream, though. Things went, well, fine in the new room. I didn't have the nightmare, though there were a lot of late-night footsteps which revealed nobody. At this point, I did start sleeping with a flashlight, by the way. A man was also heard yelling several times in the house, loud enough to be heard over the TV and send the dog barking even. But again, that wasn't too bad. But I once woke up suddenly to pure fear, and I bolted out of the room all of a sudden. I stopped halfway to the kitchen, realizing that nothing was following me, but that was a very, very strange night. It got worse on Christmas too. We had family over and open presents in the living room. We had a couch sat in front of the big sliding double doors which connected to the parlor, and the doors were closed. My mum looked over towards the couch and started screaming all of a sudden. We all jumped and tried to follow her gaze, but there was nothing there. She made a bunch of apologies and suddenly left the room. I talked to her later about it, and she said that she really didn't want to talk about it, but finally she said there was a man standing behind the couch. He was older, and he was wearing a suit with grey or black pinstripes, and he had a little round hat. Well, as you can imagine, I freaked out hearing that, and asked if she had ever seen him before, and she said that she hadn't. I then told her about the dream, and we both got pretty nervous about that. She changed her room that night too, to be closer to the bathroom. There were other oddities in that house after that, but we never did see him again. We eventually moved. Several people have moved into that house since then and moved out. None have lasted past a year, and, well, it has laid empty for some time now. In 2022, my brother and I moved out of our mum's house and got a place of our own. It was a single wide trailer about maybe 10 minutes away from where our mum lived. It was my first time being on my own like this, and there wasn't any fancy thing about this place. Just a typical trailer, but the storm does stick occasionally and makes a loud squeaky noise when opening and shutting. So whenever somebody is coming or going, you'll definitely know. Now, my brother worked at a pest control company, so his hours were just all over the place. Sometimes he'd be home early, other times he'd be working very late, and so this left me to make sure that he had food to eat, which I didn't mind because I actually really enjoy cooking. Something about it just calms me down, so anyways, one particular night my brother was working late. So I made dinner like normal. It was chicken wings and a mixture of onion rings and potato wedges that night, and had finished everything before he had ever made it home. Now, whenever I cook, I usually don't immediately eat. I've always been like this. I don't know why, but it's just what I like to do. On this occasion, I decided to have a smoke, so I went out on the back porch to smoke my cigarette. There's a window where I can see into the kitchen from the back porch, but the blinds were shut, but I left the light on in the kitchen. As I'm smoking, I hear this loud storm door and then footsteps inside, so I look towards the window. I see a shadow walk by through the kitchen. Not really thinking too much about it, assuming it's my brother. I finish my cigarette and head inside so that I can let him know that dinner was cooked and waiting in the oven. However, I notice his bedroom door is still shut and the light isn't on. He normally leaves it open when he gets home, or if he's on the phone he'll shut it, but the light would be on. So I just pop my head in and he isn't there. I walk through the trailer back towards the bathroom and my room, but again he wasn't there either. I opened the front door and his truck wasn't even in the driveway. I wasn't exactly scared, but more confused. I did get a bit of an uneasy feeling because I know that I heard the storm door and saw someone or something walk past the window. I searched the entire place again, hoping to not run into an intruder, but nothing. I was completely alone. My brother eventually pulls up about 30 minutes later, and I'm sitting in the living room and he noticed my confused demeanor. He asked what was wrong and I tell him what happened. He then tells me that he'll sometimes see a shadow in the trailer too, but always believed it to be me until he realizes that I'm in bed. I'm a loud snorer. And we have no idea who or what it could be. A few weeks later, I was home looking after my niece. I leave the tiny bags of chips on the counter, separated by brands but in neat rows. She can grab one whenever she wants a snack, and she happened to be down for a nap, so I took the time to clean up a bit. The counter is directly behind me, perpendicular to where I was standing as I was washing dishes. That's when I hear a sort of light crumple sound and turn around, expecting to see my niece standing there with a bag of chips. But instead, I see a bag on the floor about 3 feet away from the counter, and she's still sleeping, where I had left her and in the same position that I last saw her in, undisturbed. Again, I'm just uneasy and a little bit confused. I didn't bump them, and I mean, they were a good distance away. The air or the ceiling fans weren't on. The doors and the windows are shut, no breeze or drafts either. The chips weren't piled or thrown willy-nilly on the counter either, and when they're neat on the counter there like that, there is a 1.5 foot gap of countertop space between the chips and the counter's edge, so there's no way that it could have fallen off, much less ended up 3 feet away in the middle of the floor like that. We've heard from previous tenants and the landlord that some years before an elderly lady had gotten sick and passed away in there. So now I'm thinking, well, maybe it was her. I moved out the following year because my brother had met a girl and he had gotten her pregnant. She needed a place to move into because of her own issues and I was outed, which I didn't like but eventually came to terms with it. They would occasionally come by and tell us of spooky things happening that still went on in that trailer. She would see shadows too, and they both would hear footsteps inside when they were outside. Voices and giggling would be heard by one of them while the other was not home. Sometimes the kitchen cabinets would be open and they would always wake up to them like that. Random stuff would go missing, only to find it elsewhere in the home. She always thought that it was her pregnancy brain as well, until one night that they were on the couch watching TV. And my brother would always put his work boots by the front door, and they said that they heard a scuffing sound. They mute the TV and one of his boots just comes flying into view and hits the wall by the TV. He said that they both jumped, turned the TV off, and run into their bedroom and go to bed. The next morning when he's leaving for work, that same boot is back by the door, but not in its normal position. He said that it seemed like something had just thrown it back towards that same door. My brother and sister-in-law always got creepy vibes there afterwards, and they didn't like to invite people over because they didn't want to look crazy or for anything spooky to happen. They finally moved out in August of 2024, and they were very thankful to leave that place. So I enjoy hiking and geocaching in my free time. With the increase of attacks in this area though, I tried to avoid Grand Mere. found a neat little park with my geocaches hidden around the park. It was far enough away from Grandmere where I felt comfortable to go off on my own, and with my pocket knife in hand, about an hour into my adventure, I found myself a bit off the main trail. I was looking for a geocache. It was a very calm and quiet day that day. Usually you can hear other people walking around, birds, animals, the waves from Lake Michigan, but I was met with an eerie silence that day, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. Well, I stood up and started to look around, my eyes locked with a man watching me from the main trail. Once our eyes met, he started to walk towards me, and I got this strange feeling that I needed to get out of there quickly. Being a woman in her late 20s, alone in the woods with a strange man watching me, was definitely not ideal. I started walking back towards the main trail. My goal was to get some distance between the two of us. He blocked the path, though, and tried to talk to me. I tried to keep walking, but he blocked the trail, making it hard to go around him. The path was surrounded by prickers and mud, etc. The man began to talk to me, and he asked me if I was searching for mushrooms or if I had lost something. I explained to him that I was geocaching, but needed to get back to my car. The man then gave me a creepy smile and continued to block me from getting back to my car. Finally, I was able to end our strange conversation, choosing to take another path since he would not let me pass him. As I started walking away, I looked over my shoulder to see him still staring at me, just watching me walk farther away. When I finally got back to the main trail, I stopped for a moment to look around to see if I could spot the man anywhere. I didn't see him. I continued to walk back to my car, and at this point I can see the parking lot ahead of me. I only had maybe a quarter of a mile or so to the parking lot, and this is when the man reappeared from a small side trail and started walking behind me. As I walked faster, his footsteps started sounding quicker. I looked over my shoulder again, and he was now about 200 feet away from me. I walked faster, checking on the man again. Now he's only 100 feet from me. It was apparent now that he was trying to catch up to me. In that moment, my phone started ringing. My best friend was FaceTiming me, and as I answered, I held up my phone, as if trying to show my friend the park that I'd found. Once the man realized that I was on the phone, his pace slowed instantly. I made it back to the parking lot, and I get into my car. I noticed the man was lingering in the parking lot until I was fully in the car. He slinked away towards a different set of trails until he vanished from my sight. That man, he seemed to be in his late 20s to 30s, average build, darker hair with green eyes, and I'm wondering if anyone else has encountered a strange man around this area, because I live in southwest Michigan, about an hour away from Grandmere State Park, and this park has had 2 semi-recent attacks, only 6 months apart. One incident included a female who was knocked unconscious and woke up hours later. She discovered that she was injured, and the other incident also included a female. She was attacked while walking her dog, and both women gave a description to the local police department, and the descriptions from both victims had many similarities. These attacks happened in April and September in the same year of 2024, and both of them are eerily similar to what happened to me. It was the summer of 1989, and I got to leave the Locato Res and spend the entire summer with my half-brother, same dad, different mums, in Kentucky. I was 12 and he was 14 during this time. His stepdad was pretty cool and smart too. He was a nuclear physicist and always had an answer for everything. Not in a sarcastic way either, but in a genuine way, especially if it pertained to the natural world. My step-grandma was a nurse and worked a swing shift at 2 different hospitals. The poor lady not only worked like 16 hours a day, but also would come home to clean the house and cook large meals for everyone too. Honestly, I felt really bad for her. Like, on the res, my family all lived next door to each other. Where my brother's family was, they were too. So sometimes we'd go over and help out his grandma cook and clean and all that. We even got started on firewood for her because she'd often do that too. We'd sometimes stay until she'd left for work, and then we would walk the field back home. It was different there in rural Kentucky. The nights were darker and the dark was quieter, and not that I couldn't be on the res, but there was always someone moving about there. I mean, sure, you could go out a lot further and reach the same level of dark and quietness on the res, for sure, but I'm going to assume that you know what I'm talking about here. Occasionally, a passing car on the highway or maybe a distant freight train would break up the monotony there in Kentucky. Now, my brother's stepdad ended up getting cable TV one day, along with a movie channel, so we had made plans to sort of binge watch all the movies that we could that Friday night. We let Grandma know that we would not be over that day. My brother even invited his friend over to spend the night, and we had gone to town earlier and bought all the snacks, pizza, potato chips, black cherry, strawberry cola, and lemon lime canned sodas, and plenty of candy. If I remember right too, Escape from New York was going to be on that night, so we were pretty excited. Finally, Johnny Carson was over and the adults were going to bed. No sooner had we got settled in, there was a loud knock on the door. My brother's step-uncle, Bill, his stepdad's brother, was at the door demanding to speak with his brother. We asked if everything was okay, but he had this look of terror on his face and waved us off. Stepdad comes out and his brother says we need to talk about Mum, so they step outside and we're all trying to listen, but they took a walk. A few moments later, Stepdad comes in and gets dressed and says that he'll be back. He also had a look, but sort of one of disbelief, I guess you could say. Now, here's what happened as it was known to us. So that night, Grandma was going to work like normal, which was around 9 p.m. at night. She said that she had got a few miles down the road. Keep in mind that this is a rural road with little traffic, especially at night. When all of a sudden, a bright, blinding white light shone over her car. She described it as intense and hot. It caused her to stall. The light was about 50 or so feet above her and never made a noise. She sat there paralyzed with fear until it left maybe about 10 minutes later. She was then able to start her car again and she just went back home. She said that she tried to call her son, my brother's stepdad, but the line was dead and so was able to call her other son, Bill. Bill and my brother's stepdad took turns driving her to work for the next few months until she got over the fear, and even then she took another route for work all the time. But weirdly, she also said that a few days later, 2 men dressed in black ties came to talk to her. She said that they claimed to work for the government and showed badges and asked her a bunch of questions. And the whole experience, it really changed her personality. She went from being warm and non-aggressive to being impatient and short with people, family included. But years later, she denied everything, denied seeing anything or talking to anyone. My brother's stepdad believes that it was something military related and she was threatened to not say or speak about it. Everyone tried to get her to see a therapist. I always thought that she acted that way because she felt violated and, well, that nobody would believe her. Shortly after that, maybe a year or so, I suppose, shadow figures started being seen around the outside of her house too, and my brother's as well, where there wasn't any sort of paranormal activity before. And that was the last time that I was ever allowed over there. We did do a cleansing ritual when I got home, but my dad isn't into that sort of thing at all, so he never joined us. All he would say is that he knew that there was some bad juju there, and that was it. I grew up in an old house in the UK. My family home is a 4-story terrace, just over 250 years old, situated on a busy street. It was originally a manor house with lots of land, but was split into 3 terraced homes with more built sort of alongside of it in the late 1890s to early 1900s. There were 2 cellars, basement rooms, 2 living rooms on the ground floor, and the kitchen. The first floor had the bathroom, my parents' bedroom, and my brother's bedroom, and the second floor was my bedroom or living space. Now, I have experiences there from being very young that I may share in the future, but for now I'll focus on some experiences that happened in my family home from me being around 15 to 16 to my early 20s. When I was around 15 to 16, I was up in my bedroom reading. It was a Saturday afternoon and I lived with my parents, obviously, my younger brother, 2 years younger, and our dog. I had no music on or TV this day, but I could hear general muted traffic noise outside. At some point, I heard someone come in downstairs, the door opening, closing, and keys rattling. My mum shouted hello up to me and told me to come downstairs because they, Mum and Dad, needed to talk to me about something. This was weird, as usually she'd just tell me whatever it was that I needed to know if she was shouting up to me anyway. I asked why, and she shouted back, "Just come downstairs," in a sort of frustrated tone too. So I did, thinking that it must have been important or I must have done something wrong or something. I got downstairs and quickly became confused though because I couldn't find them anywhere. I shouted hello in case they'd gone into the cellar. This wouldn't be normal either, but nobody responded and I was confused trying to work out where they might have gone. I thought that I must have been imagining it though, and started to walk back upstairs when my brother shouted down from his room asking me what Mum wanted, because it was weird that she called me down. I replied to him saying, "Did you hear her too?" Obviously I assumed that he must have, but I was just a bit weirded out because this meant that he'd heard her too, but I was sure that there was nobody there and I was second guessing myself, I guess. But then he didn't respond. So I walked up to his room to talk to him about it. I opened his door and he wasn't there either. It was then that I got this weird chill sensation and goosebumps and started to feel a bit spooked, so I left his room and went back downstairs trying to make sense of what had just happened. Weirdly too, just as I got back downstairs, my mum suddenly walked in with the dog. She had taken him on a walk and I asked her what happened and where she had gone. She was confused and assured me that she had been out for around an hour at this point and had not been back at any stage. She said that my dad was at work, he had been out since 8 a.m. and was due back in a few hours' time, and my brother, well, he was allegedly at his friend's house. On another occasion when I was 20, I was working in an off-license sort of convenience store. The store closed at 10 p.m, and once we closed, cashed up, cleaned up, etc., I'd get out at about 10:30, home for around 11, still living at home at this stage. My mum called me at 10:10 p.m. asking me where I had gone, and obviously I was confused and told her that I was still at work locking up, and she said that I had come home 15 minutes ago. Her and my dad were in the front living room and they heard me come in. A little bit of context here too is that we used the back door to come in and out and had 2 living rooms, one at the back and one at the front. My mum and dad would be in the front room, which was closed off from the other, and the stairs were in between them. Mum said though that they had heard me come in, shout hello, which we normally did when any of us came home. Mum and Dad both said hello back and asked me why I was home so early. They said that I shouted, "So you're ignoring me then?" in a sort of jokey way, and they heard me walk upstairs chatting on the phone with someone. My dad then came upstairs, first floor, and shouted up to me to see why I was home so early and to check that everything was okay when he noticed my light wasn't on and it was silent. So he came back down and they called me and found out that I hadn't been there at all. My dad rushed upstairs to make sure that nobody had broken in or anything, but there was nobody around. On another occasion when I was around 20, my mum and dad were sitting in the living room quite late, 2 a.m.-ish I think, and heard my brother practicing his guitar in his room. This wasn't unusual as he would often practice for hours. They were enjoying listening to him play faintly when they both remembered at the same time that he was in university, living in student accommodation 200 miles away, and he had taken his guitars with him. When I was around 22 years old, my best friend was visiting at one stage. It was a Friday night. I had been quite unwell, so she was coming around to chill, listen to music, chat, etc. My parents were out at a function this night, and it was mid-January-ish. My friend went upstairs to use the bathroom, next to my brother's bedroom, and when she came downstairs, she said, "Oh, your brother has just shouted you for something. He must have thought that I was you when I came upstairs." My brother, though, was back at uni, and we were alone in that house. I asked her if she was certain that she heard him, and she was adamant that she had, to the point that she really thought that I was trying to spook her for a laugh. She knew of the above occurrences and they freaked her out. I told her, though, that he wasn't there and that he was at uni. She didn't believe me, in fact, and demanded that we go upstairs to see what he wanted. She was 100% convinced that she had just heard him, so I shouted, and obviously I got no response. She said, "He mustn't have heard you," so I invited her up with me to prove that he wasn't home. She confidently came with me, still certain that I was joking around. We got to his room, I opened the door, the light was off, and his things weren't there, and obviously neither was he. She turned a bit of a funny grey colour after that, and she wasn't okay. I would like to preface this by saying that working at my job has completely changed my perspective on the paranormal. For context, I work at a vintage store that specializes in old antique Western American artifacts. The store is located in a wealthy part of the state, where a lot of wealthy people buy in bulk to decorate their second and third homes. This means that we have a lot of sourced items being moved in and out of the store at all times. I'm not part of the sourcing by any means, I simply sell items and help manage the store. But most, if not all, of the items obviously have sort of energy attached to them, I guess. Not always good either. Within 3 months of working there too, I knew that it was haunted, and that the resident spirits had taken a liking to me. With the coming and going of items, certain energies and events occur and stop too. Now, things were sort of weird from the beginning, I guess, but I always chalked it up to being a somewhat old building. One morning I was opening the store on my own. It was the dead of winter and everything was very dark and snowed in. But the moment that I walk in, it is absolutely freezing. I think that the heater conked out in the night. I go to turn it on and see that it's working perfectly fine though, and the warmth that it's emitting seems to be dissipating after a couple of feet. I ignore it and turn on the main floor lights. I walk downstairs where it's pitch black. This is where we keep the majority of our vintage items. And before I can turn on the lights, our music turns on at full blast. Problem is that the music isn't an automatic system. I mean, I control it myself from my phone, and I had yet to turn the system on. I was the only one in the building and around the general vicinity, so no one else could have turned it on from their phone. After calming down from the scare, I turn on the lights to discover that all the pillows have been thrown off of our massive vintage leather couch. I still think it's weird, but I'm trying to rationalize it by saying maintenance must have come in the night to fix something, and they did that. I clean them up and walk upstairs again to find all the lights are now turned on. I clean them up and I walk upstairs again to find that all the lights that I've just turned on have suddenly gone out. The light switches are switched off again, not just the power too. Again, I ignore it and turn them on again and walk outside to open the front door and turn our open sign on. And this is the moment where I realized everything. Our locally made chapstick display, a heavy thing, gets completely swept off the shelf, like someone aggressively pushed it off in front of me. To be clear too, it didn't fall, the shelf didn't budge, it was pushed off 100%. 50 to 100 chapsticks go flying everywhere, and the acrylic case shatters into pieces. The music system suddenly starts playing the music very loudly again, and honestly, I'm just frozen in shock. Things suddenly go very quiet though. It was as if it or they just wanted me to finally acknowledge it. The computer screen turned on seconds later, as if it was telling me to get to work now, and I think I must have stood there for a solid 10 minutes, just frozen, not knowing what to do. Now, on another occasion, and this took place around 4 months ago, our main vintage collector had brought in old vintage mirrors that he'd found in different places and constructed a wall of them on the side of the stairs going down. I came back from vacation, slightly horrified to be honest. I feel like mirrors just hold really bad energy, especially ones owned by other people before. But it was a normal day at work, helping customers, logging inventory, etc. But one of the employees was working with me and we were casually chatting about life. Eventually, she went downstairs to help a customer with finding the price on a vintage fur coat and some artwork, I think. It was when the customer's daughter is walking upstairs, aka passing the mirror wall, that she suddenly screams. I, being the person in charge, run toward the screen to check on everything. This girl is inconsolable though, and claiming that she saw a shadowy figure in the mirror. The mum is calming her daughter, saying that it's just a shadow, sweetie. I investigate and I don't see anything. Just the normal bad feeling that I experience passing those mirrors. We help this lady and she eventually leaves with her items. A couple of hours later, a different woman wants to buy a wall coat rack right by the mirrors. As I'm using the drill to remove the coat rack, and my coworker is holding the other end of the coat rack, her face suddenly pales. She's staring at the mirrors and can't look away. I see her do a double take and continue to stare at them. Obviously, I'm concerned and finish helping this lady out. Immediately after she leaves, I return back to my coworker who is still just staring at the mirrors. It's as if she was in a trance sort of state. I shake her out of it and she can't speak. It's only when she said my name and I look back at the mirrors that I see the same figure. A morphing figure, subtly taking on different appearances. Some feminine, others masculine, no face, just features. Used to these things around here by now, I drag her upstairs and sort of ignore it. The rest of the day though, I heard from multiple customers about how they thought that they were seeing things in that same mirror. One girl even threw up in the bathroom because she said that she suddenly felt so sick walking downstairs. When I came back for my shift the next week, it was gone. My other co-worker had informed me that apparently it didn't sell, but one of the other employees walked down one day to find it cracked. I don't know what happened to it or where it went, but the rest of the mirrors are still there. All of the relatively younger employees seem to experience things too, but not as much as I do. The older employees, they don't seem to experience as much, but they agree that there are weird things that happen here. We also have some seemingly nice or playful resident spirits, I guess you could call them. They like to flick light switches on and off, make knocks that can't be blamed on the building, play with the building's temperature, and mess with items on shelves and all that. Occasionally, they like to make messes and play tricks too, throwing pillows off couches, Jellycat stuffed animals being rearranged in the night, make sounds to scare people, and sometimes switch the music playing and play with the volume levels too. Generally, things that happen here are harmless, not to mention that they love to play with our security camera system too. But we've had the cameras and the electricals looked at 1,000,000 times and they all work fine, but things will stop recording and cut out all the time. In any case, on another occasion I was approaching the end of my shift, which means cleaning up and organizing the store for the next day's employees. I clean up our vintage toy area and walk behind the shelves to organize our vintage Levi jeans rack. I hear a clatter and go to investigate, thinking that something had just fallen over. Kids place things back on shelves in precarious situations, and things fall all the time. Not always because of the activity, is what I'm getting at. So I walk over to the toy corner and see a knocked over toy train, standing up though, which was a bit weird. This thing doesn't run on batteries or anything, it's super old, but I watch as it starts moving at a moderate pace, out of the corner and into the next aisle section. Once again, it's just a model train. No strings, no batteries, no track, nothing. It stops after about maybe 6-ish feet of movement. After my initial internal screaming, I decide to leave it there for whatever is moving it. I hesitantly ignore it and go back to cleaning. No more sound or movement, and right before I close up, I put the train back on the shelf. On another occasion, I sold a customer an old turquoise sort of Native American ring. It was on sale, so no returns. A week later, she calls though and begs for a return. She drives literally an hour back to the store and says that she doesn't want the ring anymore. I think to myself, someone regrets spending the money they did, and I get it. But then she goes on to say that things have been so weird in her house since she bought it. She said that her cats were acting up, the house was making weird noises, and doors were closing on their own. I wasn't supposed to take it back due to policy and all that, but we worked something out in the end. I mean, she seemed so frantic. Sometimes you'd think someone is making something up to get their money back, as it happens in retail, but genuinely, she seemed really scared. And based on my experiences working at my job, I didn't doubt her either. Nothing happened in particular after we got the ring back, luckily. It was sold a little bit later to a collector, and we didn't hear anything after that, but still, it was a weird situation. Now, this story is not my own. It's actually my friend's who was visiting at the time. She came to visit me at work. She wanted to try on some vintage clothing, so she goes into the dressing room to try it on. While she's doing that, I go into the next room over to show a customer the bathroom. But when I come back, my friend is sort of shocked to see me walk back into the main shop area. She looks back behind the counter and then back at me, sort of confused. I can tell that she's processing something. She asks, "Were you not in the back room just now?" And I'm confused, seeing as I wasn't and my coworker left early. Now, my friend is a very practical human being. She has to see it to believe it sort of thing. That's her philosophy anyway. But she then goes on to explain that the backroom door, which is slightly visible to the customers, was halfway closed. She said that there was a shadow matching my height and size, making noise back there and moving around. She said that she thought that I was back there grabbing items. She said that she thought that she heard me respond and say "aha" too at one point. Mind you, nobody else was back there and no other customers had come in at that point. When I went to take a look, the figure back there, or whatever it was now long gone. Nothing seemed out of place, but she was absolutely convinced that I must have been back there. Anyway, these are just some of the experiences from this place, and like I said, this place has changed my perspective on things for good, and I don't think I'll ever be the same after working here. This happened a couple of years ago, but I often think about it and what this person's intentions truly were. So, a couple of years ago, probably 2018, me, a 23-year-old male, I was outside of my mother's house close to midnight. It's dark in the neighborhood, nobody is outside, and it's quiet and pretty chill. I'm smoking by my car, just listening to music and vibing pretty quietly, when I see a person walking up the street towards me. Nothing to be alarmed about, but she gets close. She's a cute mid-30s woman, sees me smoking and asks if I have a cigarette. She was friendly enough, but I say no, unfortunately I don't. But we have a bit of a nice quick chat. And I mean, every young man has fantasies of a cute woman walking towards them looking for something, right? And I mean, you never know, but definitely just a fantasy at this point and wishful thinking. But during our quick chat, probably only a minute or so, she says, "One moment, let me take this call." So she calls her husband, I guess. Don't recall how I knew that, but it was her husband. I believe she must have mentioned him in our chat at some point. This is a bit of an old memory, like I said. But this next bit is what creeped me out. She says on the phone, quietly, sort of under her breath, "Hi, honey. Oh my goodness, I think I found one." She was excited about it, but in a sort of weird way. Hard to explain, but it definitely sounded sinister. It creeped me out and gave me red flags immediately. Plus, I'm thinking, found what? I already said that I didn't have a cigarette. Plus, she was just walking around the streets. She and her husband are looking for something? What does that even mean, right? So, while she was still on the phone, I just turned around and went inside, and I locked the door. Really, I don't know what to think of it to this day. What could she have meant? I mean, best case is that she wanted like a three-way with her husband or something, which I'm not into at all, but worst case is that they were going to rob me or do something awful and weird. What do you think her deal was? Do you think that I overreacted, or was it a good call in the end? When I was about 3 years old, I'm 41 now, my family, mum, stepdad, older sister and I, moved into a rental home in a nice neighborhood within our small town. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, and was way bigger than the house that we came from. However, even though I finally had my own room, my sister and I decided to continue sharing a room and a bed. I think we both felt a bit weird in the new home, but my mum just figured that we'd shared a room for so many years that we were comfortable and would eventually grow out of it. This incident, it happened when I was between the age of 4 and 5, and my sister, she would have been around 8 or 9. Now, the way our room was set up was our bed was in the corner of the room against the wall, and my sister, she slept close to the inside against the wall, and I slept on the outside. We had an oscillating fan against the wall that aimed toward our feet, and just outside of our door was the hall with the bathroom right across the hall. Now one night, my sister woke up to use the bathroom, and for some reason, I felt the need to wake up and look down by my feet. And standing there, at the foot of the bed, closest to my side, was a dark silhouette of my sister. I couldn't make out any facial features, as it was just a dark void of a silhouette standing still there. I could see the fan rotating from behind her, but noticed the strands of her hair didn't move once the wind hit us. I called her name and got no response. Called her name again and again, but there was no answer or movement. When I looked out into the hallway, I saw the bathroom door closed and the light in the bathroom was on. And as soon as the bathroom door opened, it was gone, and my sister walked into the room. I remember that I was absolutely terrified and began crying. My sister came in and made sure that I was okay, and eventually I must have fallen asleep. My sister eventually came in and she made sure that I was okay, and eventually I must have fallen asleep. But even that young, I remembered the experience the next day, and it would stick with me for all these years. I was a 9.5-year-old boy, so this happened a decade and a half ago now. It was summer vacation, the time was noon, and I just took a shower. Towel wrapped around my waist and dripping wet, I was feeling happy like a good naive boy. I went into my bedroom, which I shared with my parents. I was picking out clothes and nobody was in the room with me. Almost as soon as I walked in though, I could feel the ground vibrating, which was weird. As I picked clothes, I felt the vibration was coming from behind me, around my parents' bed. It went on and off like a cycle almost, but each time the vibration came back stronger. I wanted to ignore it and go about my happy day, but eventually I just couldn't ignore it anymore. I put on my shorts, and with t-shirt in my hand, I turned around to see what was going on. It was exactly as I imagined. My parents' bed was shaking for no discernible reason, and it seemed to be coming from underneath. The shaking got so bad that other objects started to shake from the bed, hitting the ground. Then, all of a sudden, it stopped again. But this time, right in front of me, I saw this weird creature crawling out from underneath the bed, about a meter or two away. It was pure black, the blackest thing that I've ever seen in my life. In fact, it was so dark that it was hard to discern features on this thing. It sort of looked like a goofy 2D object, but it definitely had 2 legs, a torso, 2 arms, and a head. It didn't know that I was there, I think, in the room, staring at it. It was about my size, and sort of seemed to look around for a second. At the time, I interpreted that as it brushing its shoulder off after crawling. But then, it suddenly stopped. Its eyes turned to me, and I could see fear almost. It seemed to be scared of me more than I was scared of it. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was maybe a fraction of a second. Then, without even moving one bit or making any noise, it just disappeared from my existence, like just blinked out of existence. Obviously, I was terrified. I ran out of the room and I told my parents. They came to check what was going on, but in the end I don't know if they believed me or not. My theory is that if it was real, it was an extra-dimensional creature that I saw that day. And yes, after that, my day was completely ruined. When I was young, me and my family moved into this pretty old house in England, and it was in pretty bad condition when we moved in, so we had to do some renovations to fix it up, and for personal reasons, I had to share a room with my mother, and this is where I would experience most of the ghost stuff. As you came into the room, this is what it would look like. On the left is a wall, and on the right was my little bed. Hugging the left wall was my mother's bed, and a small nightstand, and also, this all took part over the course of about 7 years. So, it started off slow, such as me and my siblings seeing someone at the corner of our eyes while we would play board games late at night, or just feeling like we were being watched. Eventually, though, it evolved to actually seeing it often. Now, although I shared a bedroom with my mother, I would keep all my toys and stuff in my brother's room, so we would often be in there late at night playing or talking. And every time that I would leave the room, the exact same toy would come launching off the shelf it sat on and land at my feet. But my parents, they were big believers in the paranormal, so they would tell us to ignore it and don't pay attention to it. Obviously, we never listened. From there, it would get worse, and it seemed to be targeting me. One night, I was asleep in my mother's room as usual when I suddenly woke and was sitting up. I opened my eyes, and through the little light in the room, I could see a short figure standing by my mother's nightstand and hunched over, staring at her. I didn't have time to pay attention to the details, since I immediately started screaming and crying, so loud my mother woke up thinking that I was being murdered, and as soon as my mother woke up, the figure disappeared. She calmed me down and put me back to bed, and honestly I thought it was over, but that was really just the beginning. From that point on, it would be a nearly nightly routine, at least 4 times a week. I would wake up in the middle of the night, sit up and look over to my mother's nightstand, and see the exact same thing. Some sort of figure standing over my mother, and again I would scream and cry and so on. Sometimes my mother would leave a little bit of light turned on for me on her nightstand, but that didn't help either as the figure would still come back night after night. Eventually, I managed to identify what it was, too. It was a little girl with blonde hair, in a dark blue dress with light blue patterns and flowers on it. Even though I could tell what I was looking at, it still absolutely terrified me, and I would still scream and cry nearly every night. Sometimes it would be in a different spot instead of next to the nightstand, such as standing by the door, looking at me instead of my mother, and sometimes closer to my bed. Eventually, my mother got tired of me waking her by screaming and crying, and she went to see a psychic. This part is crazy, I know, but she described what was happening to us every night to the psychic, and the psychic told my mother that it's a little girl called Samantha that has been following my mother since she was a child, and she acts as a guardian angel of sorts. That's why she was always watching over my mother as she slept. The psychic also drew an image of the little girl, which my mother showed me once she came home, and I immediately started bawling because, I kid you not, it was the exact same girl. We have since moved out of that house and I no longer live with my mother, but I do have plenty more experiences from that house and in others that I've lived in. This happened in February of 2020. I live in the central Arkansas area for reference too. So my buddy's grandparents owned some farmland about 15 to 20 minutes outside of our town, and we would regularly spend the night out there on weekends with some of our other friends. We would make a fire, drink, etc. And this particular weekend, it was just him and I. It was pretty dark by the time that we got there, but it was the standard fare. We had decided to set up the fire on the dirt path that ran from my friend's grandparents' house through their field to the woods. But this day we built the fire closer to the middle of the field. Not long after we get the fire started, we sit down and get some music going and crack open our first beers. He turns off the music and notices something in the sky behind me. My back was facing the woods, so I turned to look. There was a bright light in the sky above the tree line. I wasn't too weirded out by this, and neither was he. However, I had never seen a star that bright before. I opened up his stargazer app on my phone that I had had forever, thinking that we were close to a planet or something. But before I could even point my phone in that direction, the star suddenly moved. At this point, we both froze. The light moved quickly and smoothly to the right, without any bobs or waves or anything, and was utterly silent. That was when I noticed that the light was coming from some kind of flying vehicle, and was actually much closer than we thought. It was probably 300 to 400 feet away, flying above the woods. This thing was also incredibly fast, too fast to move that quietly without making any sort of noise. It was dark though, and I couldn't make out exactly what the vehicle was, and the bright light emitting from its side sort of obscured any good look. But it moved perfectly parallel with the tree line, just right above it. And it was like it had left when it noticed that we had noticed it. We continued watching as the UFO just quickly and quietly moved on in a straight line until it was beyond our sight a few seconds later. We just sort of looked at each other like, what the heck was that? And began to discuss what we had just seen, sort of in hushed tones like we were dreaming. 20 minutes or so later, we hear a noise coming from the sky and see two loud planes flying side by side, going exactly the direction that the UFO had gone. At this point, we started to think that it was a military drone of some kind, and we didn't see or hear anything else that night, so we thought that it was that. I still think about it every now and then though, and I don't know, the whole military drone just doesn't really add up to me. I decided to share this in looking for some other people's opinions, so what do you all think? What do you think it could have been? I, a 29-year-old female, used to do some street performing when I was low on money, and at the time of this story, I was 25. I had recently lost a lot of weight and needed to save some money for skin removal surgery. This was due in addition to buying all new clothing and seeing a chiropractor because of the changes in my gait affecting my spine. Pro tip, by the way, is that losing weight is really expensive. I don't know why nobody warned you about that, but yeah, that was my experience anyway. So, this was a Friday night and I was in a college town near the state university with a lot of bars and restaurants around. Because all of my clothes hung off of my body like a tablecloth, I was wearing a decorative scarf tied into a dress, and it was a little on the revealing side, but it certainly didn't look as sloppy as the rest of my clothing. If you don't wear decent clothing and makeup and such when you street perform, people assume that you're homeless and can be really terrible towards you. This is relevant to this story. So, I was tuning up my guitar, sitting in a camping chair outside of a couple of bars, and at around 8:30 p.m. this beige SUV pulls up and parks in front of me. The guy driving it hopped out and approached me. "Hey, do you want something to eat?" "Oh, no thanks, I'm okay, but thank you." "Okay." And he got back into his car, but instead of driving away, he just sat there staring at me. I thought it was a little bit strange at the time, but I was focused on getting warmed up, so I didn't initially worry about it too much. I was only planning on staying out until about midnight anyway, so I wanted to maximize my time. It was the end of the dinner time, beginning of the bar time rush, so it took me a little while to realize that the beige SUV was still there, and the guy was still sitting in the driver's seat, staring at me. I'm pretty sure he didn't even pay the parking meter in the end. Anyway, at about 9:30, he hops out again. "Hey, are you hungry yet?" "No, I'm okay. I ate before I came out here." "Come on, I want to give you something, but I don't have any cash. Let me buy you dinner." This does happen. When someone who doesn't carry cash sees a street musician that they like, they will often offer to buy a snack and bring it to you, so I didn't find that too strange. "Okay, sure. If you want to bring me a snack, that's cool." "Okay, come with me." No, I mean, I'm not leaving my spot here. There's a really good restaurant I want to take you to, though, but it's too far to walk. We need to drive there." "Sorry, I'm not really interested in going somewhere. I need to stay here and make some money tonight." "I thought you were hungry, though. Come on, let me buy you dinner." Me, starting to get frustrated. "No, look, I told you I'm not actually that hungry. If you want to tip me with something other than cash, a slice of pizza from the place across the street or a soda or a cigarette or something, that I'm fine with, but I'm not leaving this spot, okay?" "No, I'm not going to buy you a slice of pizza. If you want dinner, you need to come with me." At this point, tons of people were walking past us, and I was getting really annoyed at him for keeping me from playing music. "Well, I'm not going anywhere, and I need to make some money tonight, so I'm done talking about this." At that point, I started playing my guitar to show him that I was done with this conversation. I probably should have been more concerned by this point, but I was honestly just a little bit ticked off. It wasn't that uncommon for men who saw me street performing to offer me food or shelter in exchange for sex, so I kind of assumed that that's what he was after at this point. And for about the next hour, I focused on just playing music and chatting with people, and it was actually a pretty productive night in the end. I had almost forgotten about the creepy dude until he got out of his car and leaned against the door, still staring at me. At this point, it's almost 11 p.m. and it dawned on me that he had been there for over 2 hours. That was certainly when the alarm bells finally started going off in my head. I had a hard time focusing on the music after that because he was just sort of standing there, staring at me, and the longer that it lasted, the more I felt like he had something more nefarious than just trying to bribe a young homeless woman to sleep with him in mind. At about 11:30, I realized that I needed to do something sooner rather than later. It was pretty much peak bar hour, but the streets were going to become less crowded eventually, and I was going to need to walk home at some point. I certainly didn't want to risk him following me. Now, When I'm street performing, I'm in friendly mode and I'm not the most intimidating looking girl in general, so I don't think that he was expecting me to confront him directly, but when I feel threatened, I tend to get pretty mad pretty quickly. Figuring that I had plenty of witnesses, I walked right up to the guy, angry as heck by this point. "Look, why are you staring at me?" Taken aback, he says, "What? You've been staring at me for 3 hours now. Do you just like making younger women uncomfortable?" I was mad, talking progressively faster and louder, and it was very clear that this wasn't going the way that he expected it to. No, I just want to buy you dinner." "So you're just waiting for me to get hungry enough to go get dinner with you, when I've already said no several times? That's not being helpful, it's being creepy. And look, I know that there aren't any restaurants still open at like 11:30 p.m. around here anyway." No, this one is. It's still open." "I don't care if it's still open because I don't want to go anywhere with you, and I told you that. So why are you still here waiting?" "No, you don't understand." He looked like he was racking his brain for an excuse at this point. What? What am I not understanding about you staring at me for the last 3 hours?" "No, you see, I'm an Uber driver." Of all the stupid excuses that he could have picked, this was possibly the dumbest. Me pretending to understand. "Oh, okay, I get it. You've been waiting all this time for someone who ordered an Uber." Yeah, that's it." Me dropping the act. "And you were just going to leave them waiting while you took me to a restaurant then?" What happened next freaked me out more than anything else that night, because as soon as I blew a hole through this guy's story, it was suddenly like he took off a mask. His smile disappeared, and his voice was deadly serious as he climbed back into his car and said to me, "Okay, you'll never see my face again." And he drove off, fast. I just stood there in shock. And look, I'd had plenty of creepy encounters while street performing, but not like this one. It was impossible to convince myself that he was going to do anything besides abduct me. I was done after that too. I decided to order an actual Uber home instead of walking, which cost about half of what I'd made in the tips that night. And in the back of that Uber, counting my cash, I realized then that it was time to retire. The small amount of money that I made during the daytime was not worth the effort, and the decent money that I made at night was definitely not worth the risk anymore. I've since moved on to a new side hustle and also developed agoraphobia, diagnosed by the way, because of this and other incidents like it. I hate leaving the house alone, and I order most of my groceries and household supplies through DoorDash now, and I have a job that's only 3 blocks away from my apartment. Still though, on my walks to and from work, I find myself constantly checking my surroundings, using the reflection in the storefront windows to make sure that I'm not being followed. Honestly too, I really hope that this creepy guy in the SUV keeps his promise and that I never see his face again. The only other person to hear about this directly from me is my wife. I told her the story when we first got together in 2021. I was recently reminded of it because we just had a baby at the hospital that I used to work at when all of this was going on in my life. It's the first time that I've been back there since 2020. Now, my ex-wife and I had separated during the pandemic, making divorce and custody of our 3-year-old at the time an absolute nightmare because courts weren't open, everything was telecourt on Zoom calls, and things got dragged on all the time. I had just received a job offer from a new hospital, but because of COVID, it had a start date that was 10 weeks out, so I gave my old hospital a 2-week notice and took 8 weeks off to myself. In that time to myself, I realized how nasty the divorce battle was getting, how expensive it was, how much my ex was also manipulating people around me that I started cutting off a lot of people close to me. I stopped talking to people who weren't my attorney, even my 2 cousins or the woman I was seeing at the time. The gyms weren't open and I couldn't work out. My new job pushed back my start date another 6 weeks due to not having enough appointments to get new hires cleared for work through employee health services, physical exams. So I'd be out of work a total of 3.5 months by this stage. I wasn't on any verge or a mental breakdown or anything, but some things started to close in when I realized how many people I had to disassociate myself with. Bills still coming while my savings were dwindling, attorney fees racking up, and I was missing my son a lot with no court order in line, and until one was in place, I only got him whenever his mum would let me. In trying to pass time and also trying to find some financial gain, I started to frequent the only place that never closed, the casino. I quickly found myself playing there daily for hours on end, and ended up racking up play points getting offers for meal comps and free room stays, but I always went home at the end of the night in anticipation of maybe getting my son the next morning. Most of the time, I'd leave around 2 or 3 in the morning when the table action from Baccarat, my game of choice, would die down. Some days I was in a casino psychosis, I guess you could call it, where I would leave, not cash out any chips because I knew that I was coming back anyway. I'd get some sleep, a little, and then I'd get back up and check my phone to see if I was getting my son for the day, and touch base with my attorney, shower, get back into my car to head back to the casino, 40 minutes away, all while the sounds of the slots were still ringing in my ears from the nights prior. One night I came home at around 1 a.m., and I had to be up early. The woman that I was dating at the time lived 2 hours away in San Jose, California, and I was severely neglecting the relationship, and so we made some plans. 1 a.m. was early for me, and I was pulling up to my house. My porch light wasn't on, but turning into my driveway, my headlights shined in that direction, and that was when I saw a boy, probably around maybe 8 to 10 years old, I would guess, by my door, and I hopped out of the car quickly thinking that he might be in trouble. When I got up to the door, though, there was no one there. I was certain that it was a boy, and I wasn't seeing things from being tired because, I wasn't. I experienced paranormal things when I was younger, but never in this house, so I automatically thought my house may be haunted. And it's the first time that this ghost, or whatever it was showing up now that nobody else stayed there besides me, perhaps. Still though, I checked around the house, inside, sat still waiting to hear anything, any creaks or cabinet doors closing, and eventually I just went to bed. I drove to San Jose the next day and stayed there, and it was then that I learned that it wasn't my house that the boy was staying in because I saw him again while in a whole different city. My ex-girlfriend lived in this type of townhome, I guess. That's 3 stories with the master bedroom being on top. It had a living room, a kitchen in the middle level. Garage and front door entryway was on the first floor. We'd ordered DoorDash at the end of the night, and when the food arrived, I looked down outside the window to see the Dasher leaving, so I ran downstairs to grab the food with my car keys in hand, since my car was right out front. I bent down to grab the food and unlocked my car, and held down on the unlock button, accidentally rolling windows down. And that's when I saw someone sitting in my passenger seat. Just grey skin, black eyes and black hair, hardly able to see over the window of the 2018 Camaro. I ran up to the car, and when I did, nobody was in it. I got in to roll my windows back up, and quickly ran back upstairs with the food, not saying anything about what I had just seen. I didn't see him again the next couple of days while staying there, but I got back home and did my routine again, making my way to the casino, and this is when I started seeing the boy more frequently. Whoever he was following me around everywhere. I'd see him at home, in parking lots, in distances behind crowds. He was short, but weirdly, he looked, dead. There was one occasion that I saw him, and he didn't even seem to have a face. For 3 weeks, he followed me around, too. I wasn't scared of him, I guess. I felt like so much was going on, and some days I was only caring about hitting on the tables that he sort of annoyed me more than creeped me out. One night, though, I definitely got sleep paralysis and I could see him in the corner of my room, but his voice was in my ear telling me that he'd help me win, just take him to have fun. I fought it off and got free and eventually fell back asleep. Growing up being raised a Thai Buddhist and having experienced things when I was younger, I knew generally that you aren't supposed to give in to what the spirits want or test them in any way, as things can get much worse. That same following day, I hit a $40,000 run on the baccarat table that happened fairly quickly too. I couldn't bet a single hand wrong. I doubled down every time, in fact. 500 to 1,000 to 2,000 to 4,000 to 8,000 and so on. It was a huge rush, but I went home and there he was again by the front door. This time grinning ear to ear like he was taking credit for it or something. Anyway, the next day I went again and I got up to about 17,500, betting 2,500 at a time, and I saw the little boy laughing at me in the distance. It was then that I lost everything in 4 hands, trying to recover everything from the first lost hand, and eventually I just left in a rage. I had attorney fees to pay for, and really I could have just used that money on that. I was contemplating deeply grabbing more cash and going back to try and win it back, but I had an argument with my girlfriend from San Jose about not spending enough time together, and it stopped me from going anywhere. The little boy appeared again in the darkness when I was in bed, about to go to sleep that night. And ignoring everything that I had learned growing up, it was that night that I challenged him. Gambling had me double down on him, and I told him that if he was going to be following me around like this, then he's going to be stuck with me, that he's going to be miserable. Do I look like the type of person that has anything to offer you? You're going to starve following me around. And it was at that very moment that I was done yelling at this dead kid. It's like he understood exactly what I said, and clearly it wasn't what he wanted. He let out a huge ear-piercing scream, and honestly it felt like it shook the house. And he just faded away. His eyes were the last thing to go. After that, I never saw him again, and haven't experienced anything paranormal since then too. In the following weeks, the courts started opening back up, in personal litigation and all that, and I got a court order to get my son. Things got into motion towards finalizing the divorce with his mum, and I ended up listing the house for sale for us to split the money instead of buying her out. I moved and I started work at my new hospital and was finally able to focus on working and spending time with my son. I split with my ex-girlfriend that I was dating at the time. Also, it's like everything bad had just gone away all of a sudden and left with that little boy. I never mentioned a word of this to anyone else besides my wife, just because we joked about my divorce and wishing that we had met during the pandemic when people were forced to stay home together. I opened up to her about what kind of year that was for me. I obviously don't have any proof to show that this has actually happened. Maybe that's why I don't really speak about it too, but I mean, I have no reason to lie about it, or even draft up this long-winded storyline with so much background information. Looking back, I'm realizing that maybe I was being haunted by something for whatever reason, but when it was happening, it just didn't feel that way. I mean, sure, there were moments I jumped or was startled, but the way that I was reacting to it, it felt like I was being burdened, not haunted, if that makes any sense. In any case, I'm glad that it's all over now. I don't know really why any of this happened. I mean, I was under a lot of pressure at the time, so who knows. Maybe it was in my head, but still, the whole thing felt very real to me. And I've never had anything happen like this ever again, or previously, so I don't know. I don't think it was psychosis or anything. Like I said, looking back on it all, I really do believe that I was being haunted. This took place about 10 years ago. So, there I was in my beat-up Jeep Wrangler, rolling home from my girlfriend's house at about 2 a.m. It's pitch dark on this twisty back road with forest on my left and a Christmas tree farm on my right. The road is pretty narrow and has very little shoulder, but not much bank either, just gravel and grass really. I'm going way faster than I should be when I come around the next bend and there's a grey Camaro with black racing stripes. Looks like maybe an SS from the 70s, but it's hard to say. Parked completely sideways, blocking nearly the full width of the road, headlights shining into the tree farm. And there's this guy, leather jacket and jeans, slicked back salt and pepper hair, leaned back casually on the side of the car smoking a cigarette. I slammed my brakes and managed to bring it to a slow roll. I'm too trusting of a person, so I think, oh wow, must be having some car trouble. I'll roll my window down and pull up to see if he needs help. Before I can even start rolling my window down, this dude tosses his cigarette to the ground and full-on starts walking at me. Not along the side of the road or toward my driving side conversationally, but straight into my headlights, straight at my still-moving Wrangler, in fact. And he looks furious. So at this point, I'm like, alright, forget this. He's either angry for how fast I was going, or a plainclothes cop, or something like that. So I gun it, and yank the wheel over, jumping off into the grass on the side of the road, whip around the tail of his car, and I distinctly recall, for some reason, the taillights feeling extremely bright as I passed. This angry red just sort of filling my vision, and lighting the whole cabin of my Wrangler up. Eventually I pull back up on the road and check my rear view, afraid that I'd hit him, or afraid that he might be after me now, or just plain afraid, who knows, but when I do, there's nothing. No car, no man, no illumination on the tree farm, nothing. Now I do stop. I pull over and I get out, thinking that I must have gone further than I thought and around another curve or something. But no, this is definitely the curve. I've only made it about another 50 feet, if that. In fact, I can see my torn up tracks in the grass from where I went, both where I got back on the road and where I went off initially. To this day, I wish I had the sense to go back and check for that cigarette butt or anything, any sign of him. But I was way too creeped out at that point. So in the end, I got back in my Jeep and I got out of there. So I work at a bar that has a back alley that then leads into a small secluded parking lot. There are several large trash cans, and many small ones there too, and there are some addicts, homeless folks, etc., who will come to the alley pretty often. Usually they're pretty harmless and just look through the trash or ask for $1, but sometimes they aren't, and tonight was one of those times. So I went out to the back to throw out a bag of trash when I noticed a man walking quickly by the farthest group of garbage cans from the back door, which also happens to be the one that I use. He looked in my direction. I don't think that he knew that I could see him, and then as he saw me walking toward him and the trash can, he quickly and quietly hid himself in the dark behind the trash cans. I didn't see where he ended up, but it scared me a lot. I mean, I was the only one around, and I knew that he was hiding there because I would have seen him walk past if not, and it was the only way to go, so really, he was hiding there waiting for me to do, well, I don't want to think about that. I left my bag of trash right there where it was, and I immediately walked back inside. I hope that he left soon after I went back in because I would hate to see somebody get hurt. If you're familiar with the Denver area, I lived in the Clayton neighborhood on York. As with all millennials, the rental market crippled me and I had to find a place with charm, aka a 1920s brick duplex with 1970s updates in the year of our Lord 2022. But as a recently divorced man with 50-50 custody, my bank account dictated my residence. To give you a sense of the space, it was a shotgun-adjacent style home, 900 square feet, upstairs, with an unfinished basement that was really only used for laundry and housing spiders. My daughter and I had rooms on either end of the 10-foot narrow hallway, with the world's smallest full bathroom splitting the distance. For the first few months, it was just an old house on a busy street. Fire trucks, ambulances, and cop cars flew down the street each night, so much so that I had to get blackout curtains or my room would legitimately look like a knockoff disco of flashing lights. My daughter was 5 at the time, and she had a hard time adjusting to living in 2 houses. She would frequently climb into bed halfway through the night because something had woken her up and she was scared. I would feel her crawl in and over me routinely, hands, elbows, and knees, feet even, all haphazardly crawling all over me. Now one night, around 2 in the morning, I felt her, but this time not crawling into the bed but crawling out. I felt her tug my shirt, pulling me to the side to crawl out of the door, and I don't know why the change in direction woke me up, but it gave me an uneasy feeling, so I rolled over to grab her so she wouldn't fall off the bed. I murmured something like, "Kiddo, do you need to go to the bathroom?" But as I turned to grab her, I felt nothing. My arms folded into each other and my eyes shot open instantly, thinking that she tumbled off the bed. As I sat up groggily, I saw her standing in the doorway, but that was when I realized that it wasn't her. I can still remember the face, close to my daughter's age, a slight smirk, innocent and playful. She wore a yellow sundress with white flowers. She's burned into my memory, but not in a frightening way, I suppose. I turned to look at my daughter, passed out cold, snoring on the other side. When I quickly snapped my head back to where the little girl was standing, whoever she was gone. I've told that story 1,000,000 times, and it wasn't the last experience that I had there, and the little girl certainly wasn't the only person that I saw. Now, for some time, it was unsettling thinking about the little girl. I hated scary movies. The jump scenes always made me flinch, but seeing her that night was different. There was no smash cut to a twisted face, no loud sound, just a little girl standing there looking at me with a soft smile. If anything, it felt like a roommate messing with me, maybe. I felt her. I felt my shirt being tugged. I felt the weight on my chest, which means that it wasn't a dream. It was a physical experience. Honestly, I felt like I was losing my mind for some time after that. I hadn't told anyone yet. There wasn't a way that I could share it and not make it sound like I was just dreaming. And honestly, I had started to convince myself that it probably was just a dream. Unfortunately, or I don't know, perhaps fortunately, the next day would make it much harder to convince myself that I was dreaming. So if you know anything about rec hockey, then you know it's hard to find open sheets of ice. My beer league games mostly started at 9 or later. I had leaned into playing, and as a single dad, needed help with my daughter on the late weeknights. My mum offered to come over and watch her while I played, which was a nice break from the week and a good way to distract me from the night before as well. When I got home at around 11, my mum was in the living room reading a book. She walked over to me and almost hugged me until this stink of the hockey gear caught up to her. I still remember her looking at me and saying, "So it was kind of a weird night." I put my keys on the table and asked her what she meant, and she said, "Well, your electric razor turned on in the bathroom a few times." I chalked it up to just a weird coincidence, but then she said, and I kept getting up to check on Lou. It was weird because I thought I was hearing her run up and down the hallway, and I could have sworn that I heard her giggle, but every time that I got up to check on her, the door was closed and she was asleep. It was real. She experienced it. I didn't tell her about that night too. Honestly, I didn't want to admit it to myself because it meant the night before, the little girl, that it was all real, and that she wanted to play or something. Anyway, I've since moved in with my girlfriend in a house that feels quiet and calm. Sitting outside now, it's a lot easier to process through everything, but And after the experiences I had with seeing the girl and my mum telling me that she had heard the little girl running up and down the hallway, laughing and trying to get her attention, the house felt open to more activity at the time. The summer in Denver is warmer than most people think, and this house had no air conditioning. Even with fans, it was easy to climb up to 80 inside with even the best fan setup. This was honestly my first step for my debunking too, because I thought that I was having some type of, like fever or heat-induced experience. I bought several swamp cooler style fans, and while I felt comfortable temp-wise, it definitely didn't help. My next thought was carbon monoxide or black mold or something. I became obsessed with trying to find out why I was hearing, seeing, and feeling things, but in the end, I couldn't find an answer and nothing helped. That summer too was a cluster of experiences. I can't recall each one in order because it was easily weekly, sometimes almost a daily feeling in fact. The main feeling though was what I could only describe as, like static energy. I tried to explain it to people like standing next to one of those electrical towers. It wasn't audible, but I could feel it walking in the hallway, in my bedroom, and the kitchen steps down to the basement. Like, for instance, the basement steps, they were old and creaky, and initially I would think that it was the house settling, and to a degree it probably was the case. However, there were two very specific instances that it was not the case. One night I was brushing my teeth and I heard my cat's ping pong ball bouncing in the kitchen and down the steps. This happened 3 times. A steady bounce, bounce, bounce on the tile floors, and then a hit off the wall leading down the steps, bouncing down one stair and hitting the door to the backyard. After the 3rd time, I called out to my cat to knock it off, and I remember so vividly sticking my head out of the door and looking into the kitchen, and there was my cat, not in the kitchen but laying in my daughter's room, in a very cat-like pose of not caring. But there was just no way that she could have made it over there and lounged in the time that I had heard the last ball bounce down. On another occasion, I was working from home and had my computer set up in my dining room. Again, in shotgun fashion, the house basically was a straight line from the back door to the front door. My desk was set up in a way that I could look out the front window of the living room to my back room. I was on a team call with an employee, and that's when I heard footsteps running up and down the back stairs, to the point where I had to tell my employee to give me a second. I leaned back and told the cat to knock it off and looked back at the screen when my face went white, and I did a double take down the stairs, because when I had looked back at the screen, I had noticed my cat, again in a very casual pose, sitting on the couch in the main room. I had told my employees about it, and when this particular one experienced it with me, I felt very validated by this because the steps were clear enough that they were audible but quick and playful, and they had heard it too. And if it wasn't a cat, then it was something small and curious, and I really don't know how to explain it. Now, this next one is hard to describe, but I'll try. So, as more things happened, I started talking about it more, generally on the phone or on team calls. If I was in a room, the hallway or kitchen and started to talk about the little girl, I could suddenly feel her around me. What this felt like was a sort of quieting of surrounding noises. If you can think about the sensation when you faint, the noise kind of muting or to a quiet ringing, almost like a tunnel hearing instead of a tunnel vision, that was a trigger for me. The next sensation would be a classic goosebumps, and then kind of like an inner radar where I'd just see a part of the room in my head. A lot of the times it was the hallway, but I'd just have this feeling of like, hey, look here. All 3 of those would intensify, and I would have to intentionally say no and walk away to sort of break it off. Honestly, I don't think that I'm doing it justice to just how constant the feelings and the little sounds were in this place. I only slept with headphones there. Nothing ever felt evil, I guess, but I just couldn't keep up with the constant movement and energy. I needed to sleep, and things were too curious with me, and It got to the point where I'd pretty regularly feel a little tug here or a pressure there on my bed. I stopped letting my cat stay in my room to try and debunk that, and it persisted. I told my mum about all of this, and she, for my birthday, told me about her friend, who apparently was a medium. Even with all of my personal experiences, I had serious doubts about this all, and I made sure not to give him any info prior to and told my mum to do the same. When I showed up to his house though, we sat down and I did a tarot reading, first time I'd ever done it, a little cleanse and then dowsing rods too. This was when my inner skeptic certainly kicked in. I mean, here I was holding 2 rods apparently communing with the dead. Nothing happened. I held them in my hands and asked a few questions, and they limply moved, but nothing of consequence. I remember him asking me to ask a general question about anything, so I paused and asked if I should leave my house. The rods didn't move, but he looked at me and said, "I want to talk about your house. There's a girl there, isn't there?" I nodded and said, "Yeah, my daughter," and he smirked. "No, you've seen a little girl. She's like a bedroom, a hallway, stairs or something. Very playful." At that, I remember putting the dowsing rods down and just asked, "What does she look like to you?" At this point, I was trying to see if it was a tell I was giving off or something to make all of this make sense. "She's not from now. I see her in like a homemade type of sundress. She's probably close in age to your daughter. Flowers. I see flowers." I was lost in the vision of the girl that he was describing to perfection. "She likes to play at night a lot, doesn't she? You have balls that she throws for you, or a pet or something. She's not evil, she just likes having nice people there. And she isn't the only one there, too." Honestly, whether I had fully understood it or not, I was at terms with the little girl that I had seen, but there was something else in the house, something older and bigger. At times, the movement that I heard and the energy that I had felt was different, heavier and not as playful. I really did not like hearing him say that. He told me that the girl was someone to talk to, basically to talk to her like a parent if I was over her playing and needed a quiet space. But as I told him what I experienced with feeling the tunnel hearing, the inner vision of where people were, he told me to be careful. It sounded like I was sensitive and that thinking was one thing, but talking directly to something, allowing them in, could lead to attachment. I can assure you that that day was a long drive back home. 2 nights later, I was laying in my bed, and I heard books on my shelf being flipped through. At first, I sort of chalked it up to the fan, but after about 5 minutes of the noise, I turned the fan off and it kept going, like somebody flicking through books. I sat up quickly, 2 or 3 times flashing my phone's flashlight to try and catch something, but there was nothing. After one more attempt, I turned off the flashlight and I sat in my bed and said, "I need to go to bed now and I need you to be quiet in here. Please, go to bed." All the sensations suddenly hit me. The quiet noise, the goosebumps, seeing where she was, and then it was quiet and stayed quiet. After that, I said thank you, and then I fell asleep. August 11, 2001. It's easy to remember the exact date because it was the same night as the premiere of Samurai Jack on Cartoon Network. I was 8 years old at the time, and this was a big deal. So of course I had a sleepover with my best friend Kay at her mum's house. We slept in the living room so that we could watch TV as we fell asleep. I was showing Kay my new favorite movie, Titan AE, and around 3 a.m., we were woken up by decorative indoor wind chimes. For whatever reason, they were going crazy, like there were actual wind gusts in the house. At the same time, it sounded like a whole pack of cats fighting in the front yard. Being children, it freaked us out, and We decided to go tell her mum that we were going to move to the bedroom for the rest of the night. When we opened the door to the room that her mum and 12-year-old sister had been sleeping in, we couldn't see them in the bed. Kay climbed into the bed and was like, "What the heck? There's no one here." So we assumed that they had moved to one of the other bedrooms, but there were 3 after all. So we began the search, but they weren't in any of the rooms. We started turning on every light in the house and getting a bit frantic. Doors were locked, keys were on the rack, car was in the driveway. Kay was freaking out because she thought that her mum's stalker got out of prison and abducted her mum and sister. Now, the next thing that I remember was the sunlight was what woke me up in the next morning. We were back on the living room floor as if we had never gotten up, with no memory of going back to sleep. But the weirdest thing is that we both recalled vividly looking for her mum and sister. So, naturally, we interrogated them the second that we saw them. Luckily, my bestie's mum is pretty open-minded and she actually believed that we weren't making it up, and that was pretty strange as well. Her mother, to this day, continues to recall the details of that day, but unfortunately my friend has somehow completely forgotten that it happened. I usually get a bit of a dismissive reaction when I share this story. My husband believes that it was a dream or sleep paralysis, which I have no problem considering, but I mean, come on, it's not that. I do wonder how Kay would forget something that we used to talk about obsessively as we got older. Others have suggested that I ask her mum and sister if they still remember our story. I will soon, but they're dealing with something at the moment, and it would be a bit inappropriate to bother them with this at this stage. But like I said, the last time that I talked to her, she recalled it, and she remembers that night in detail. This is a bit of a weird story that I actually just learned about last week. So I'm 26 years old and asked my parents why I'm the only one out of my siblings that knows Urdu. It's a Pakistani language. We all know our parents didn't teach us, and they barely speak Urdu around the house, but only when they're talking to family overseas. But even that didn't happen with regularity enough that I would have picked it up. My mum said that my great-grandpa taught me, and I said that I don't remember him, and she said that he died slightly before she was born. Apparently, when I was around 2 years old, I had an imaginary friend named the same thing as my great-grandfather from my mother's side. It was a fairly unique name, and growing up in America, I'm sure that I've never heard that name anywhere else before. My mum said that I would talk to him in English allegedly, and he would speak back to me in Urdu until I learned, and I was near fluent by the time that I was 3. Mind you, I don't remember any of this, but after I found this out, weirdly, I had a dream last night where I got to meet my great-grandfather, and he explained to me that he taught me this because he was tired of watching all of his family lose their culture. I tried speaking back to him, and he was speaking in Urdu in the dream, which has never happened before to me, and I promised him that I would try to learn more about my culture, and asked if he wanted me to tell his family anything from him. He mentioned my youngest uncle by name and asked me to tell him not to ride his motorcycle too fast, since that's how his dad died apparently. I woke up a few hours ago and I asked my mum how her dad died, and she said that he was in a motorcycle accident when he was driving too quickly and apparently slid under a garbage truck. I immediately called my uncle after this in Pakistan, and I told him not to drive recklessly and that his grandpa came to me in a dream and explained that to me. I don't know what he thought about that, and I don't know what's going on or how or why this is happening to me, but it's so weird and intriguing that I just feel like I have to share it. I am absolutely confused and simultaneously amazed by this whole thing. I want to be able to learn more from him and talk to him again, but I don't even know how I would go about it. Has this ever happened to anybody else? And if it has, what did you do? So, I had an experience about 10 years ago that I'm still searching for answers about. I'm mostly curious to know if anyone else has seen a humanoid similar to the ones that I'll describe, as I haven't been able to find any accounts describing anything like them in all these years. This happened around late winter, early spring of 2015 in upstate New York. Early one morning, after my husband and child left for the day, I was tired and went back to bed. This was about 8:30 in the morning. I have a distinct memory of having been dozing off when the bedroom door, which I was facing, quietly opened and two or more humanoid creatures entered. They made absolutely no sound and approached me so quickly that I could barely register what was happening. All I remember is one approaching close enough to my face to make out how they looked. Next thing that I know, I'm waking up in my bed and over 3 hours had passed, which I remember just didn't feel possible. I also remember the beings right away because I was so baffled at how it had gotten so late in the day. But after a few minutes, I remembered what I'd seen before falling asleep and was instantly filled with just dread and confusion. I almost instantly started gaslighting myself about it, convinced that it was just a simple case of being in and out of dream state. But I still remember what these things look like and feel confused about it to this day. Here's how I would describe these things. They were a light off-white color with absolutely no distinguishing features. No eyes, ears, nose, genitals, nipples, hair, nothing. Just average male height, average male build, while humanoids with skin or some type of outer covering that looked almost like, like wide white ace bandaging or something. Basically like a tightly and freshly wrapped mummy almost, but there was their skin, or I'm assuming that it was their skin at least. Perhaps they were disguised. The craziest thing to me, though, is still how they simply had no eyes, not even slits in their fabric like skin. I will add here that this is not my first encounter with the otherworldly, but it is the one that has baffled me the most, and the one that makes me wonder if maybe I've been abducted. So, can anyone relate to this experience or sighting? Have you ever heard of anything like this, or seen anything like this? The last few days when my daughter wakes up, she tells me how Grandpa is dead right away when she opens her eyes. Why is Grandpa dead, Mummy? Or, Mummy, Grandpa is dead. My dad passed away 6 weeks ago. I just calmly say, yes, Grandpa is in heaven now, sweetie. Last night, though, she wakes up at 2 a.m. hysterical that something bit her. We sleep together, and this hasn't ever happened before, but I just figure that she's had a bad dream or something. She was hysterical, though, saying, Mama, I don't want to stay in this room. Let's go downstairs. I'm scared. Today, she was on the toilet going to the washroom, and I hear her saying, You're bad, stop it. I come around the corner and I say, Who are you talking to? And she's like, This boy here, he's a bad boy, and just points and sort of stares. I'm like, What boy? And she looks at me and back to the same spot and says, The boy here, Mama, he bit my toes. Now I'm just like, this is weird, but okay. I'm like, okay, is he tickling your toes or biting them? And she replied that he's biting them and he's so bad and naughty. Anyway, our imaginary friend's comment at 2.5 years old? Like, here I am thinking, do I need to burn some sage in my home or something? This whole thing has me a little bit freaked out. This happened to me back in October at and around my university, the Thursday prior to the week before Halloween. So I went to the student union at my university for lunch and spotted this couple around my age I haven't seen before in front of me in line. I felt something was off about them immediately too. I made brief eye contact with the girl while I was ordering, and she seemed to be waiting for her drink. The weird thing though is that I saw straight black from her eyes. went back to my apartment a bit shaken up by this, but forgot about the experience later on in the day. Now, later that night, I decided to go out to a bar with my roommate. His nickname is Prop, and there are 2 rooms in the club that I frequent. I walked into the second room to grab a drink, and as soon as I entered, immediately after obtaining my drink, I saw the exact same couple that I saw at the student union earlier that day, just seemingly dancing the night away. And this was my last full memory for the next 4 hours. I had bits and pieces of consciousness, but they were blurry and lasted only like 10 seconds each time. My next full memory was me slumped on a park bench while Prop and his girlfriend ordered us an Uber back to our apartment. Keep in mind, I only had a few drinks throughout the night, nowhere near enough to black out or throw up even once. But what followed was the worst vomiting spell of my life that lasted into the following evening, even worse than the near-death food poisoning as a toddler I had, and times where I drank way too much. Anyway, the next day, Prop told me him and his frat brothers were looking for me at the bar for over an hour, and I was nowhere to be found. They assumed that I'd gone home, but I wasn't answering my calls, obviously. He also stated that he ordered an Uber as soon as he eventually found me, after over an hour of waiting. And apparently, here I was standing and rambling with my eyes rolled in the middle of the bar as if I was possessed or something. Prop said that he had never been so confused or frightened in his life, even though he is one of the largest skeptics and tough guys out there. I haven't seen this couple since then. However, I have a few distinct eerie memories or dreams that they've appeared in. I believe that this may have been a black-eyed human encounter, an entity who followed me, or an alien abduction in human form, something like that. This is not the only peculiar phenomenon I've had, as a series of astounding events on Sunday has led me to share this here. I also have a friend who had a similar experience at his university, but I'm unsure if they're actually related or not. For the first time in our home last night, my wife and I experienced separate things within about 30 minutes of each other. We just returned from a week in Miami Sunday night. My wife was pretty wiped out still yesterday and went to bed at about 9 p.m. last night. I stayed up until about 11. Our master bedroom has the bedroom itself, the bathroom, and a reading room that we have a treadmill in off of the bathroom. The treadmill itself faces away from the bathroom and towards the window, so the screen on the treadmill is visible from the bathroom. The screen is pretty large and it's basically a small TV in the unit. When not in use, the screen dims to a standby mode and it's still lit, but it's very dim. Now, when I entered and turned the bathroom light on, I'm facing the room with the treadmill. It's maybe 25 feet from the doorway that I'm standing in to the treadmill. In the darkness of the treadmill room, the perfectly rectangular screen is partially eclipsed in the bottom left corner by a round object. It looked as if someone was holding a balloon in my field of vision directly between my eyes and the treadmill. There was no discernible features of whatever was blocking my view, just round in the dark. I flipped the second bathroom light on, and when I look back into the treadmill room, nothing is there and I can see the full rectangular screen perfectly. I investigate the room and I find nothing. Putting this out of my mind and assuming that I was just seeing things, I brush my teeth and eventually I get into bed. I never felt any sense of fear or dread, but perhaps 30 minutes later, I put my phone on my nightstand and roll over to go to sleep, and my wife immediately shoots up and cries out in the dark and frantically crawls into my arms, stuttering that there's a bear in the room. At this point, I'm thinking, I did see something, and there's somebody in the house. Flashlight lights up in the room and nothing, of course. My wife even got up to look around and under the bed. We calm down eventually and we go to sleep. Today we discussed it and she said that she saw a black bear walking towards her side of the bed, although couldn't say if it was from the bathroom or the hallway. It apparently crouched down next to the bed, and that's when she freaked out, and was then, obviously, gone. For reference, we bought this house in 2021, and we've never experienced anything like this. But what do you guys think? Coincidence? Seeing something in her sleep? Was it just nothing as she was half asleep anyway? Does seeing a bear have any meaning? Any and all thoughts are welcome, as this one honestly has me stumped. For context, I was probably about 11 or 12 at the time that this happened, and I lived in a tiny town in Florida called Mulberry. We basically had a McDonald's, a local corner store, and then a couple of mom and pop shops. They were all about 10 to 20 minutes apart by car. My neighborhood connected to Highway 60, which is a pretty infamous spot for bad accidents. Now, one day, it was around 11 p.m. when we decided to get McDonald's for dinner that day. But my dad was a truck driver, so getting dinner late wasn't too uncommon. Me and my brother, he would have been around maybe 18 to 20, tagged along, and we drove over to the restaurant. Streets were pretty dead, and the drive-thru was thankfully empty. We were all talking about something on the way back when it went silent. On the right side of the road was a woman, walking. Something about the way that she walked was just odd too. Her arms didn't raise or move with her steps, they just sort of hung there. Her pace was slower than a normal walking pace, and she wore a super long white dress that was practically untouched. I remember my dad kind of had a weirded out laugh like, why was she wearing that at this hour? The weirdest part was the moments after we drove past. We couldn't recall what she looked like at all. We all could recall long hair and the long dress, obviously, but we all collectively sort of blanked out on facial features. When I turned, she was still walking in the same direction at the same pace, and she quickly faded out of view into the dark. But it was almost like she just sort of disappeared. Now, I'll admit that it's 100% possible that we all just got spooked due to the time of the night, but it's something that's always stuck out in my memory to this day. I mean, it was rare to see anyone walking on the side of the road there, and especially so at night. There was really nowhere for her to be going at that hour, besides the McDonald's, I suppose, which was a drive-thru only at that hour. The direction that she was walking from, it had no houses or structures for like several miles, meaning that she would have been walking for at least an hour to be where she was when we saw her. On top of that, not many people even walked near the highway like that due to the rate of accidents that I mentioned earlier. I don't know, something about this event always stuck out to me. The way that she was walking, the fact that we couldn't remember her face, the way she sort of just disappeared in the darkness like that. It just feels off to me, even all these years later. So this is back when I was in grade 1. I was probably around maybe 6. I'm 19 now, and I lived in a really ratty old trailer park in a small town. And this one trailer had a lot of bad stuff happen while I was in there, which I blame on whatever the heck was in there before us. To be honest too, I really don't know where to start. I'm no writer, but I just want to get this out. So, I don't have many memories from this place, mostly just pictures, but they're all bad, very, very bad in fact. My parents were both heavy alcoholics, they kept each other going pretty much. My mother was working at some place where they sell or rent RVs, and my dad was one of those mechanics who would work for whoever paid him. So they had money to drink pretty much every day. I knew that once one of them walked in with a few cases of beer that it was pretty much time to disappear. Anyway, the point is that once people drank in that trailer, they'd transform. Anger, screaming, every form of abuse. One night I was laying in bed asleep facing the wall, and I feel a hard slap right on my back. From what I remember, I turned around terrified, thinking at first that it was one of them, and then looked under the bed, then ran to my parents' room and told them what happened. and my mum says that she's never ever heard a child scream like I did. They ran into my room and turned on the light, and I was freaking out. From what she made out from my blubbering was that something hit me. They lifted up my shirt, and what else do they see but a huge red handprint right on my back. They moved me to their room, and I slept with them until I was about 10 after that. I never ever slept facing the wall until I was about 17. And it's funny too, because my mum says that she was talking to my auntie on the couch there before or after this event, and my auntie was facing the hallway, mum's back to the hall. She says that my auntie looked toward the hall while they were talking, and her face just went completely white. My mum turned around, didn't see anything, and asked auntie what she had seen. My auntie had to calm down a bit before she told my mum. But apparently she had seen what looked like a little old lady around 4 feet, and some kind of sheet or cloak over it walk from my parents' room towards my room. But there was a huge tail dragging out from behind it. Now, they were dead sober this day, and they still swear by it. In this house too, I've gotten asthma and sent to the hospital with a combo of chickenpox and pneumonia. I even went deaf at that point. But this house was just awful. I moved out with my mum when I was maybe 10 and happened to drive past there one day to see it getting demolished. And I guess I'm just wondering, what happened there before we moved in? Or why or how that thing ended up in there? That place was old, that much was clear. I'm just happy that that thing, whatever it was, didn't follow us. This happened about a year ago now. I was living in Barrio Logan in San Diego at the time. My place was the side entrance of a duplex, and the house was right next to a park. One night at around 11 p.m., I was playing Call of Duty. I had my front door open and the screen door locked to help cool the house down. As I was playing with my friends, I heard screaming outside, but thought that it was just my game. But I then heard it again, followed by a female scream. My friends over my headset pointed it out and asked me what was going on in my house. I replied to them that I thought that that was my game, and nothing is happening in my home. I got up though and checked outside. Right across the street there was a man shoving a woman around the street and hit her while she was screaming. She pulls out her phone and he grabbed it and threw it across the road at my fence. He never saw me though. He then runs around the corner and she goes the opposite way. I run out and catch her around the corner and I'm trying to help her out. She kept walking and blankly stared at me over her shoulder. I asked her if she had somewhere to go, and she didn't reply. I asked if she needed help, and with that she replied with "go away" in a shaky voice. I was going to turn back to my house when the man whips around the corner and starts screaming at me. He starts telling me that I'm getting into something that I don't need to be in. I got a really weird feeling from that guy. He then puts his hand under his shirt and asks if I'm trying to get shot. I back off and said, "Hey, look, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to get into someone's business. I just saw her crying and asked if she was okay, but I'll let you handle it." I walk past him to go back home, and he starts walking behind me. I started sprinting and sprinted all the way around the block, took the back entrance to the alley, and went inside. I called the police, and 5 minutes later, 5 squad cars zoomed by my home. I'm still not sure if they actually caught the guy or not. So I recently got a job at my local liquor store. My job is 5 minutes away from my place, and I honestly love this job because it's really chill, and since I'm a local, I already know many of the customers that come in on a regular basis. This job helped me get back into contact with a lot of people that I haven't seen for a few years as well. One day, an old friend, his name is Steve, from high school, walks in and he remembers me. We hadn't seen each other for a few years, so we had a nice talk and made plans to hang out with a mutual friend sometime in the near future. I remember that we talked about how our mutual friend would do this thing where he would tell these stories that sounded super fake and made up. For example, he told both of us a story about how he supposedly got shot in the leg. But the story was different every time. Anyway, I tell Steve that our mutual friend is like Paul Bunyan with all his tall tales. Steve laughs and says, "Yeah, totally bro, he is Paul Bunyan." I remember that he had bought some beatboxes, which are this alcoholic beverage that's pretty popular in my store. I remember the exact flavor that he had and everything, and I remember clearly asking him if those things were any good, and Steve tells me, yeah, they mess you up. About a week later, I come into work and I see my coworker, Diane. She is acting strange in a way where I suspect that she's going through something tough in her life. She asks me if I remember Steve, and I say yes, of course. She informs me that apparently he had passed away. I asked if it was an overdose, and she told me that it wasn't, but also said that she felt like it was not her place to tell me the real cause of the death. Well, I think it over, and I decide the next time that I see Diane, I would explain to her that I have known Steve since like high school, and he's not just some local customer that I met at work. A few days pass and I see Diane at shift again. Mind you, I work very late, from like 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. usually. And before I get a chance to talk to her, the manager comes in and Diane goes out to the front to talk to her. I let them have their girl talk for a few minutes. Then I go outside to let the manager know that I need to quickly use the restroom. Well, when I go outside, I overhear Diane say something along the lines of, yeah, it's messed up that they would make the wife pay money to have the brains all over the place cleaned up. The manager replied, oh yeah, she's going to most likely be getting a bill for that cleanup. When I heard this, I knew. I went back inside the store and just felt so sad for my friend Steve. I just stared into space for a few minutes and went back outside to find Diane and the manager kind of staring at me as if they knew that I'd heard what she had said and were waiting for me to mention it. I chose not to, and I waited until I was alone with Diane to discuss the issue. I explained to her that me and Steve, we were high school friends, and she opened up to me after that. Turns out that Diane had an ex who did the same thing a few years back. She really opened up to me about what was going on after this. She told me that Steve had just had a newborn 2 days before the incident, and another boy who was about 4. Steve's longtime partner had been with him for like 8 years straight without any major hitches. Diane tells me that she has known both Steve and his girlfriend since the first grade. They all grew up together apparently. She tells me that she was driving the car with Steve's girlfriend in the back seat, and the widow was finally able to get some sleep in the back seat as Diane was driving. And well, then the 4-year-old decides to ask where Dad is and why he can't see him anymore. They told the kid that he was with God now. It's all just so horribly sad because the poor child thinks that God kidnapped his dad and now he's mad at God apparently. But this is where things get a bit strange. You see, that night I went to restock beverages in the back. It was around 1 a.m. and I suddenly had the sensation that I wasn't alone, and it actually felt as if I was with someone that I knew, but I couldn't see them. I had a feeling that my buddy might try to send me a message. I know that's weird, but I thought to myself that if I see anything, I would try my best not to be scared and pass on whatever message that I receive if possible. Well, I grabbed the exact same beverage that I sold him last time that I saw him and put it onto a shelf. I bent over to pick up something else, and the drink that I had just put on the shelf got smacked really loudly to the ground as if someone was frustrated or angry and hit it. This made me very uncomfortable, obviously, and I ended up calling some friends to come and chill with me for the rest of my shift. I even took a few shots of whiskey to calm myself down. Later that night, after work, I tell my mum what happened. She explains to me that he might be frustrated and angry at his own sad decisions and the fact that it was too late to change it. My mother is a Buddhist, so she gives me a Buddhist prayer to play at work to bring positive energy. I play the prayer at work the next day, and she also comes to accompany me for part of my shift. But during the prayer, a foam cup also got thrown by nothing, and my mum and I both saw it this time. However, this time it felt like a much more, like peaceful action without anger behind it. Again, I know that's weird to say, but that's just how I interpreted it. Almost as if he was saying that he heard the prayer. My mum told me that she felt that this was him trying to communicate. In my opinion, the prayer did what it was supposed to do, and I feel as if he left peacefully, and the foam cup being lightly tossed was his way of saying, "Hey man, I'm sorry I scared you the other day. It's time for me to go." I miss my buddy, and I hope anyone who hears this that is going through tough times in life gets through it and chooses to live on. Things like this are never the right path, and it will only lead to more pain for everyone involved. I still think about all of this a lot, and to be honest, I can't really make any sense of it, other than that something paranormal happened. For some context, I'm in my mid-20s, working in marketing and sales, have a girlfriend, we have a son and a baby daughter on the way. I don't smoke, don't drink, don't take any pills, I don't have any diagnosed mental illness or disorders or anything. I was always very healthy and a happy kid with a decent childhood, and even nowadays I'm also a happy person. I work hard, but I still believe that I'm privileged in some ways. I'd like to get this off my chest as well and try and understand if others have also had this happen to them. That's why I'm sharing this. So, the earliest memory that I have is from when I was possibly maybe 3 or 4 years old. The best way to describe what I was seeing from my point of view was almost like I was a robot being turned on for the first time. Everything was dark. I remember knowing that I was conscious, but for a good 5 to 10 seconds I couldn't see anything. That's when I finally could see something, but for some reason everything was in shades of black and white. My eyes adjusted to the light, and I found myself seated in what I believe was my parents' kitchen, fixated on a white tumble dryer as the clothes inside spun around. I couldn't move, and it was total silence. I remember feeling helpless. It was such a weird feeling to describe, but suddenly there was total darkness again, but my consciousness remained intact. It was as if I had just discovered my own existence, and I was feeling helpless and kind of afraid because I didn't want to be in total darkness forever. I really wasn't sure what was going on. The darkness lingered for what seemed like forever. I finally regained my vision. I woke up in a completely black world. Around me were some sort of white towering structures that resembled pillars, with figures made of white smoke perched on top. I couldn't make out any features except for their general presence. I would guess that there were a dozen of them, staring at me. The landscape stretched into what seemed like a labyrinth, and as I tried to make sense of it all, the ground started shaking. I turn around as fast as I can, and a colossal, perfectly round white sphere is coming my way. This was all happening so fast that I wasn't really sure of what to do, so I just panicked and started running around. Again, the feeling of helplessness and fear makes me sweat just thinking about it. But I ran as fast as I could, but the ball was just too fast. It crashed into me, and my memory is crystal clear of me being totally crushed by this thing. Thankfully, there was no pain, only a paralyzing fear. I remember feeling the presence of the white smoke figures around me. Strangely, I felt safe when I sensed them arrive near me. I didn't sense malevolence or that they were going to hurt me or anything. After getting crushed, darkness again. This time, though, it was as if my consciousness had disappeared too. I don't remember a single thing, until my 5th birthday, that is. Then, I have absolutely normal childhood memories. Birthdays, playing with toys, my siblings, exploring nature, first day of school, etc. For years and years, I didn't remember any of this. It wasn't until I was maybe 15 years old that I I remember this first memory when I was alone at home, playing some video games. As the memories of that happening rushed back, I literally started shaking in fear, and the feeling was so vivid that I had my first and thankfully only panic attack. I just laid on my bed, tears started pouring down my face, and I couldn't catch my breath. I eventually calmed down by doing some breathing exercises and praying, which was weird for me because I'm not a religious person by any means, but yeah, that's what I did. Once I calmed down, I was still depressed for a few weeks after this experience, and just didn't understand what had happened and where this weird memory came from. I eventually just decided to attribute it to kids seeing and experiencing weird stuff. But it wasn't real, right? Anyway, that's my weird first memory and story. I've never shared it with anyone, and once in a while, especially if I'm quiet, reading or doing something with no noise around me, the memory always comes back and I can relive that stuff in my head very vividly. What I mean is that it definitely feels more like a memory and less like something that I've made up. Luckily, I've learned to suppress it, but every once in a while, I remember getting crushed by a giant white sphere while something watched on.